Part 1, the confrontation. You sure you're in the right section? Kid Economy's back there. The massive tattooed bodybuilder's sneer cut through the first-class cabin as he loomed over 15-year-old Marcus Reynolds. The teen froze. Boarding pass clutched in his hand. Confusion flashing across his face. Vince the Mountain Matthews, 6'5" of sculpted muscle and tribal tattoos, crossed his arms over his chest, biceps bulging against the sleeves of his designer t-shirt. His workout partner, Diego Iron Fury Hernandez, let out a performative laugh from his luxury pod seat, phone already recording the interaction. "Looks like someone's lost," Diego called out, his Spanish accent thickening for dramatic effect. "VIP section ain't for everyone, bro." Marcus took a deep breath, shoulders squared despite being dwarfed by the man blocking his path. "I have a ticket for seat 2A, he said, voice steady as he extended his boarding pass. Vince's meaty hand shot out, snatching the document from Marcus's fingers. "Let me see that," he muttered, studying the paper with exaggerated skepticism. "This has got to be fake." Other first-class passengers glanced over, some with discomfort, others with casual interest in the unfolding drama. None intervened. Diego's camera captured everything Marcus's expensive but understated clothes, his composed expression cracking slightly under the pressure. The way Vince towered over him like a bouncer denying club entry. "Problem is," Vince announced loudly, crumpling the boarding pass in his fist, "people need to know their place." He tossed the balled-up document over his shoulder, where it landed on the pristine first-class carpet. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, fingers trembling slightly despite his outward calm, and typed a quick message. "Dad, they're blocking me from my seat." Setting in context, the first-class cabin of transatlantic Airlines Flight 882 from Miami to London gleamed under soft ambient lighting. It was 7:15 p.m. on a Thursday evening, with departure scheduled for 8 p.m. sharp. Outside the aircraft windows, Miami International Airport buzzed with activity against the backdrop of a spectacular Florida sunset, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Unlike the cramped quarters of economy class, Transatlantic's premier international service featured just 12 luxury pods arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, ensuring both window and aisle access for every passenger. Each pod resembled a private cocoon of luxury hand-stitched leather seats that converted to fully flat beds, 24-inch entertainment screens, marble-finished side tables, and privacy screens that could be raised with the touch of a button. The cabin smelled of subtle sandalwood fragrance, expensive leather, and the champagne that flight attendant Elena Rodriguez, 28, was currently distributing to already seated passengers. Elena had worked for Transatlantic for 6 years and had learned early in her career that the path of least resistance meant prioritizing passengers who could cause the most trouble. Her performance reviews praised her conflict management skills, which translated to keeping the loudest, most demanding travelers happy at almost any cost. The cool air conditioning raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms as he stood in the aisle, the soft hum of the ventilation system creating a backdrop to the confrontation. The plush carpet muffled footsteps, creating an almost theatrical silence broken only by Vince's booming voice. The current first-class manifest included 3 Fortune 500 executives, a minor European nobility figure traveling incognito, a famous romance novelist who'd requested privacy, and the 2 bodybuilders who'd been loudly announcing their presence since boarding began 15 minutes earlier. The cabin had the hushed reverence of exclusive spaces, disrupted only by Vince and Diego's boisterous behavior. A well-dressed businessman in seat 4C glanced up from his financial reports with a frown before returning to his work, noise-canceling headphones firmly in place. 2 women in designer business attire whispered to each other while eyeing the confrontation unfolding in the aisle. An elderly woman with silver hair and impeccable posture watched with narrowed eyes over the rim of her reading glasses, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern. Outside the first-class curtain, a queue of economy passengers had formed, their progress halted by the disturbance in the premium cabin. A few strained to see past the divider. Curiosity piqued by the raised voices, a flight attendant stationed at the curtain asked them to be patient, citing a seating issue that would be resolved momentarily. Transatlantic Airlines prided itself on its exclusive first-class experience, with marketing materials promising service beyond expectations and uncompromising luxury. The cabin's subtle design touches, mother-of-pearl accents, hand-polished wood veneer, and custom lighting designed to minimize jet lag, represented millions in recent renovations aimed at capturing the ultra-premium travel market. The digital boarding display mounted near the cockpit door showed the current time and status. 7:15, boarding in progress. Departure 8 o'clock. The countdown had begun, with cabin doors scheduled to close in 30 minutes. First-class passengers were always boarded first, allowing them to settle in with pre-departure drinks while the remainder of the aircraft filled with those who'd paid considerably less for their journey across the Atlantic. For most passengers, this ritual of luxury air travel was routine, unremarkable. For Marcus Reynolds, it had become a gauntlet. The antagonist, Vince Matthews, hadn't always been the mountain. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, Vincent Matthews had been an undersized kid with an oversized chip on his shoulder. Military service had transformed him physically, and 8 years in the Marines had given him the discipline to build himself into a specimen of bodybuilding perfection. At 34, his 6'5", 290-pound frame commanded attention wherever he went. The tribal tattoos covering his massive arms told stories he'd fabricated, claims of Maori heritage that DNA testing would have disproven, symbols appropriated from cultures he'd never studied. His neck displayed a roaring lion, which he claimed represented his warrior spirit. In reality, he'd chosen it from a flash art book because it looked intimidating. The tattoo on his right forearm, reading "Strength through Domination," more accurately reflected his personal philosophy. His Instagram profile, Mountain of Muscle, boasted 2.7 million followers who consumed his daily content, workout videos, supplement promotions, and philosophical musings about alpha living that typically involved deriding anyone he perceived as weaker. Arctic Nutrition paid him $200,000 annually as their primary spokesperson, featuring his image on protein supplements sold in 17 countries. Beside him, Diego Hernandez adjusted the designer sunglasses he inexplicably wore indoors, even on airplanes. At 31, the Miami native had built his Iron Fury brand through relentless self-promotion and strategic collaborations with bigger names like Vince. His 6'2" frame carried 275 pounds of carefully sculptured muscle, the result of punishing workouts and substances he never discussed publicly. Diego's social media presence, 5 million followers across platforms, featured more lifestyle content than Vince's luxury cars he leased for photo shoots, women who appeared in his videos as props rather than partners, private jet trips funded by sponsors. His Spanish accent, which he exaggerated for content, helped distinguish him in the crowded fitness influencer space. What followers didn't see was the crushing debt behind his curated image, the maxed-out credit cards and mounting payment obligations that kept him desperately clinging to sponsorships. The gold chain around Diego's neck caught the cabin lights as he shifted in his seat. The heavy links were 3 months' rent for most people. The scent of his cologne, an expensive, overpowering mixture of cedar and synthetic musk, formed an invisible barrier around him, marking his territory as surely as any fence. "Yo, Elena," Diego called out, waving his empty champagne flute with the entitlement of someone used to being served. "Hit me again. Beautiful." Elena hurried over with the bottle. "Of course, Mr. Hernandez. Right away." "You watching our stream tonight?" Vince asked her as she poured. "We're doing a live workout from London tomorrow. Gonna be epic." "I'll definitely check it out," Elena replied with practiced enthusiasm, though she had no intention of doing so. Diego turned his phone to include her in his frame. "Say hi to the Iron Army, Elena." She gave an awkward wave to the camera. "Welcome aboard, everyone. See how they treat us," Diego told his viewers. "First class only. Baby, this is how champions travel." The comments scrolled by kings living the life. "That flight attendant is hot." Beast mode activated. Their followers had ate up the performance of success, never questioning what lay beneath the muscled exteriors and designer clothes. Vince's relationship with physical space was proprietary. He took what he wanted, stood where he chose, touched what he desired. His huge frame sprawled across his seat and into the aisle, creating an intentional obstacle that others had to navigate. Diego's presence was equally intrusive in a different way, his constant filming turning everyone around him into unwitting extras in his personal reality show. Together, they'd build a profitable partnership based on mutual insecurity masked by extreme displays of hypermasculinity. Both had experienced rejection and invisibility before their physical transformations, Now they wielded their size like a weapon, demanding the recognition and respect they felt had been denied them in their earlier lives. Neither man had ever faced meaningful consequences for their behavior. Their followers rewarded it, brands monetized it, and society generally stepped aside rather than challenging two men of their size. They'd built careers on physical intimidation packaged as aspiration, and now, as Marcus Reynolds stood in the aisle trying to reach his assigned seat, they'd found another opportunity to assert their dominance in a space they believed belonged exclusively to people like them. The humiliation escalates. Marcus bent down to retrieve his crumpled boarding pass, dignified despite the snickers from Diego and Vince. As he straightened up, he smoothed out the document carefully and tried again. "Sir, this is my assigned seat." He pointed to the clearly printed information. "Reynolds, Marcus, first class, seat 2A. Vince planted his massive frame more firmly in the aisle. "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England." His voice carried through the cabin, intentionally loud. "Let me guess, you found that boarding pass, or maybe bought it off someone." "It's my seat," Marcus repeated, his voice steady but quieter now, aware of the attention they were drawing. "I'd like to sit down before departure." Diego swung his muscled legs into the aisle, creating another barrier. "Bro, first-class tickets cost more than your whole outfit. No way you belong up here." Marcus was dressed in dark jeans, limited edition sneakers, and a simple black cashmere sweater. Understated but expensive attire that his antagonist had misinterpreted as cheap. He glanced around, looking for support, but most passengers had suddenly become fascinated with their phones or the safety cards in their seatbacks. His heart pounded against his ribcage, and he swallowed hard against the tightness in his throat. The familiar knot in his stomach, one he'd felt too many times before in situations like this, twisted painfully. Yet his face remained composed, revealing nothing of the turmoil beneath. "Excuse me," came an elderly voice as Dr. Patricia Whitman, a 72-year-old retired federal judge, rose from her seat. "Young man, do you need assistance?" Vince turned his intimidating presence toward her. "Ma'am, everything's fine, just making sure people are in their correct seats." "Are you an airline employee?" "Oh, no," Whitman asked, her voice carrying the authority of her former profession. "No, but..." "Then perhaps you should allow the actual staff to handle seating arrangements." She turned to Marcus. "Do you have a boarding pass for this section, young man?" Before Marcus could respond, Elena Rodriguez approached, drawn by the escalating situation. Her quick assessment took in the scene two valuable first-class passengers who could create problems versus an unaccompanied minor who appeared out of place. She made her decision instantly. "Is there an issue here?" she asked, directing her question to Vince rather than Marcus. "This kid's trying to sneak into first class." Diego volunteered, still recording. "Probably saw an empty seat and thought he'd upgrade himself." Marcus extended his boarding pass toward Elena. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. Elena glanced at the document without really examining it. The path of least resistance beckoned. Side with the adult passengers who could complicate her workday and file complaints rather than the teen who would likely accept whatever she decided. "There seems to be some confusion," as she said, not addressing Marcus directly. "Let me check the manifest." She made a show of consulting her tablet, though she never actually pulled up Marcus's reservation. "I don't see a booking for this passenger in first class." Marcus's composed expression flickered with disbelief. "Could you please check for Reynolds, Marcus?" "Reynolds?" "Listen, kid," Vince interrupted. "Stop wasting everyone's time. The flight's about to leave." Lady Elena nodded, making her choice. "Perhaps you misread your boarding pass. Economy boarding is happening now. I can help you find your correct seat." "But my seat is here," Marcus insisted, his voice finally betraying frustration. "My father booked this ticket. You can call and verify." Diego zoomed in on Marcus's face with his phone. "Getting upset now? Classic." "I'm not upset," Marcus replied, though the slight tremor in his hand betrayed him. "I'm just trying to sit in the seat I paid for." A thin layer of perspiration had formed on his forehead, not from nervousness but from the effort of maintaining his composure. He had been taught how to navigate situations like this, had practiced responses to discrimination, but the reality was always more challenging than the preparation. Inside, rage boiled like a kettle about to scream. The unfairness of it all, being judged yet again by his appearance rather than his right to be there, burned like acid. He'd faced this before in different settings: the science fair, where judges assumed his project must have been built by someone else, the mall security guard who followed only him among his friends, the teacher who expressed surprise at his test scores. Each time, he'd maintained composure because his father had taught him that strategic patience ultimately won more battles than reactive anger. But the knowledge didn't make the experience any less painful. "Look at his expression," Vince stage whispered to Diego. "He knows he's busted." Other passengers were watching now. The drama too pointed to ignore. Some looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Others seemed to accept the bodybuilders' version of events without question. Of course, this kid didn't belong in first class. He didn't look the part. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to the economy section," Elena said to Marcus, her decision final. "If there's been a mistake with your booking, customer service can address it after we land." "This isn't a mistake," Marcus insisted, but his voice had grown quieter as the futility of his position became clear. Diego's live stream comments were scrolling rapidly. "Kick him out. First class exclusive. No free rides. Come with me," Elena said, gesturing toward economy. "We need to complete boarding." Marcus stood his ground one final time. "May I at least speak with the captain or another flight attendant?" "Kid, take the hint," Vince said, standing to his full height, physically looming over Marcus. "Nobody wants you here." "I've made my decision," Elena added, her authority reinforced by Vince's intimidation. "Please follow me." Marcus took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. His father had taught him that some battles couldn't be won in the moment. That strategic retreat was sometimes the wisest course. Fighting would only escalate the situation and potentially create a security incident that would be far worse than temporary humiliation. With dignity that belied his 15 years, he nodded once and turned to follow Elena toward the economy section. As they passed through the first-class curtain, he could hear Diego's commentary trailing behind him. "That's how it's done. Iron Army gotta protect the exclusivity. Am I right? First class is called first for a reason." Marcus blinked rapidly, fighting back the sting in his eyes, not from sadness, but from anger, a controlled, focused anger that would fuel what came next. As Elena led him through the packed economy cabin, past curious onlookers who'd witnessed his removal from first class, he typed another message to his father. "They've moved me to economy. The bodybuilders took my seat. Flight attendant wouldn't check my ticket properly." He hit send, then added one more message. "I'm okay, just humiliated." Part 2, the backstory. Marcus's background. Marcus Reynolds had never known what it meant to be ordinary. As the only child of tech billionaire Xavier Reynolds, his life had been exceptional from the start, though not in the ways most people assumed. Where many might have expected a spoiled heir to a fortune, Xavier had raised a son grounded in reality despite their extraordinary circumstances. At 15, Marcus had already completed coursework equivalent to a high school diploma and was taking university-level classes in quantum physics and advanced mathematics. His IQ tested above 160, but it was his emotional intelligence that truly set him apart. This trip to London wasn't a vacation, but an opportunity. Marcus had been invited to present his research on quantum computing applications at the International Youth Science Symposium, the youngest speaker in the conference's history. His work on quantum encryption had already caught the attention of leading researchers in the field. As the plane's air conditioning system hummed around him in the cramped economy seat where he now sat, Marcus reflected on a conversation with his father from 6 months earlier. "Why can't I just use my real name for the submission?" he'd asked, frustrated by his father's insistence on anonymity during the initial application process. Xavier had looked up from his tablet, eyes thoughtful. "Because I want them to see your work, not our last name. You think that they'd accept me just because you're famous?" "I think humans are complicated," Xavier had replied. "Some might reject you because of who I am. Others might accept you for the wrong reasons. Either way, your work wouldn't be judged fairly." That lesson, that his identity could be both a privilege and an obstacle, had been part of a lifetime of similar teachings. Xavier had never sheltered Marcus from reality, instead preparing him for a world that would see him through multiple lenses as the son of a famous billionaire, as a young black man in America, as a prodigy in his field. Their home library contained a curated collection of books on Black history, scientific innovation, and philosophy. Dinner conversations ranged from quantum mechanics to systemic inequality. Weekend activities alternated between advanced mathematics tutorials and community service in Miami's underserved neighborhoods. Balance, Xavier always said, between the mind and the heart, between what you know and how you use it. Marcus had faced discrimination before. The science camp where a counselor had assumed he was there on scholarship rather than merit. The mall security guard who followed him but not his white friends. The teacher who expressed surprise at his test scores, as though excellence was unexpected. After each incident, Xavier would sit with him, allowing space for anger and hurt before guiding him toward constructive responses. There will always be people who underestimate you, his father had told him after a particularly painful incident when Marcus was 12. Some because of your age, some because of your skin color, some because they're just determined to see the worst in others. How do you deal with it? Marcus had asked. Xavier's expression had been contemplative, revealing the weight of his own experiences. I remember that their limitations aren't mine. Their inability to see my worth doesn't diminish it. That philosophy had shaped Marcus's approach to challenging situations, including this one. As he sat in economy class, surrounded by passengers who'd witnessed his humiliation, he channeled his father's teachings. The bodybuilders had power in this moment, but their power was temporary. What mattered was how he responded. Yet despite his intellectual understanding, emotions still crashed inside him like waves against a breakwater. Humiliation burned in his chest. Frustration knotted his muscles. The injustice of it all, being denied what was rightfully his simply because he didn't fit someone else's expectation, felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. He opened his laptop, focusing on his presentation for the London Symposium. The screen displayed complex quantum algorithms that few adults could comprehend, much less improve upon. This was who he was, not a victim of discrimination, but a scientific pioneer temporarily inconvenienced by others' ignorance. His phone vibrated with an incoming message from his father. I'm 15 minutes from the airport. Stay calm. Document everything. I'm handling it. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He knew exactly what handling it meant. The father's journey, Xavier Reynolds hadn't planned on becoming a billionaire. Growing up in subsidized housing in Baltimore, the son of a hospital janitor and a daycare worker, his exceptional intelligence had been his ticket to opportunity. First a scholarship to MIT, then a PhD in quantum physics, followed by a career that defied conventional paths. At 45, Xavier had built global quantum technologies from a struggling startup into a technological powerhouse valued at over $30 billion. His innovations in quantum computing had revolutionized everything from medical research to financial systems. His personal net worth exceeded $8 billion, yet he lived relatively modestly compared to his peers in the ultra-wealthy class. Now, as his driver navigated Miami evening traffic toward the airport, Xavier's focus wasn't on business but on his son. His Tesla Model X moved between lanes with purpose. The driver instructed to use every legal means to reach their destination quickly. Xavier's face, familiar to millions from magazine covers and technology conference keynotes, remained composed despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. He'd been in a board meeting when Marcus's first message arrived. Without explanation, he'd simply stood, stated family emergency, and walked out, leaving astonished executives mid-presentation. The second message, describing Marcus's removal to economy, had reached him as he entered the car. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he read the latest update. I'm okay, just humiliated. The words sent a lance of pain through him, not just paternal protectiveness, but the recognition of a familiar pattern. Despite all his success, all his wealth, all his influence, he couldn't shield his son from the reality of existing in a world that made assumptions based on appearance. Xavier was no stranger to the treatment his son was experiencing. Despite his wealth and accomplishments, he still encountered assumptions and prejudices. The high-end car dealership that had directed him to the more affordable models, the restaurant Maitre D who'd asked if he had a reservation. Despite the empty tables, the investor who'd spoken to Xavier's white deputy rather than addressing him directly at their initial meeting. The difference was that Xavier had spent decades building protective layers around himself. His wealth, reputation, and influence created consequences for those who misjudged him. Marcus was still developing those protections, still vulnerable in ways that pained Xavier to witness. As the car accelerated onto the expressway, Xavier thought back to Marcus's early years, to the deliberate choices he'd made as a father. He'd taught his son martial arts not primarily for self-defense, but for self-discipline. He'd enrolled him in predominantly white private schools, not to distance him from his heritage, but to ensure he could navigate all environments with confidence. He'd maintained their modest five-bedroom home instead of purchasing a mansion because he wanted Marcus to value substance over appearance. Most importantly, he'd taught Marcus to understand the complex interplay between race, class, and perception in America. Some people will never see past their own assumptions. He'd explained when Marcus was just 8 years old. Your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to know your own worth regardless. That lesson had been reinforced through both words and example. Xavier had built his business empire not through aggression, but through strategic brilliance. His approach to discrimination had been similar, calculating, measured, ultimately more effective than impulsive reactions. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had he done enough? Had he prepared Marcus adequately for these confrontations? Was the emphasis on a strategic patience the right approach? Or was he simply teaching his son to absorb abuse for the sake of some nebulous future advantage? The questions weighed on him, as they did whenever Marcus faced these situations. The balance between protection and preparation, between shielding and strengthening, remained an ongoing challenge of parenthood, one without perfect solutions. Few people knew about Xavier's other accomplishments, the multiple black belts in various martial arts disciplines, the championship trophies from his college boxing career, the intensive training he still maintained despite his demanding schedule. His physical capability was as formidable as his intellect, though he rarely had reason to demonstrate it. 5 minutes to the airport, sir, his driver announced. Xavier nodded, reviewing what he knew. 2 bodybuilders, identified through Marcus's descriptions and a quick search of first-class passenger manifests, had physically intimidated his son and taken his assigned seat. An airline employee had failed to verify Marcus's ticket and instead sided with the aggressors. The incident was likely being recorded. Given one bodybuilder's social media presence, he'd already set several responses in motion with brief messages to his assistant, legal team on standby media relations. Monitoring for any public content about the incident, his airline industry contacts alerted to a potential situation. Security detail dispatched to meet him at the airport. The car pulled up to the departures level. Xavier checked his watch, 7:48 p.m. The flight was scheduled to depart at 8 o'clock p.m., giving him 12 minutes to reach the gate. Wait here, Dad instructed his driver. I may need you to take Marcus home if this isn't resolved satisfactorily. As he strode through the terminal, his appearance was noticeably different from his public persona. Gone was the tech executive in tailored suits. Instead, he wore simple dark jeans, a black t-shirt that revealed his muscular build, and a lightweight jacket. He moved with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to physical discipline, his presence commanding without being aggressive. Security cameras tracked his progress through the airport. Later, this footage would become part of the evidence package, the calm, purposeful approach of a father coming to his son's aid, not with rage, but with resolute determination. Xavier's phone buzzed with a message from his airline contact. Gate agent notified, Captain Lawson aware of situation. Departure hold authorized. He allowed himself a brief, tight smile. The first pieces were falling into place. What happened next would depend on how the bodybuilders responded to his arrival, whether they chose wisdom or continued their mistake. Either way, Xavier was prepared. The setting backstory. Transatlantic Airlines had built its reputation on luxury and exclusivity, marketing itself as the carrier of choice for executives, celebrities, and the wealthy. Its recent advertising campaign, Where You Belong, featured images of passengers enjoying champagne in spacious first-class pods. The implication clear membership in this rarefied air was earned through success, not circumstance. Behind the glossy marketing lay a troubling pattern. Over the past 3 years, the airline had faced 27 formal discrimination complaints filed with the Department of Transportation. 19 had been settled privately with non-disclosure agreements. 8 remained under investigation. None had resulted in substantive policy changes. Internal training materials for flight attendants emphasized passenger satisfaction and conflict avoidance rather than equal treatment. Employee reviews rewarded those who generated the fewest complaints from high-value customers, creating an implicit incentive to prioritize certain passengers over others. Elena Rodriguez had received 3 promotions in 6 years, largely because she managed difficult situations with minimal escalation, corporate language for keeping the peace at any cost. Social media had documented the consequences of these priorities. 14 viral videos in the past year alone had shown transatlantic staff applying rules inconsistently based on passengers' appearance, age, or perceived status. The airline's standard response followed a predictable template. We take these allegations seriously, investigating the circumstances, not reflective of our values. The aircraft currently parked at Gate 34, a Boeing 777-300ER, registered as TA-778, had been the site of 3 previous incidents. In one case, a black female executive had been repeatedly asked to show her first-class boarding pass, while white passengers boarded without verification. In another, a Muslim family had been reseated away from first class after another passenger expressed discomfort. The third involved an elderly Asian couple being denied pre-boarding assistance despite their clearly stated needs. Transatlantic's corporate headquarters in Atlanta maintained a crisis management team specifically for handling discrimination allegations. Their playbook prioritized minimizing legal exposure over addressing root causes. The result was a culture where incidents like the one Marcus experienced weren't anomalies but predictable outcomes of systemic issues. The airline's CEO, Richard Blackwell, had dismissed concerns raised by diversity consultants, reportedly stating in a closed meeting that our premium passengers have expectations about their environment. The subtext was clear to everyone present. Certain passengers belonged in first class, others did not. Flight 882's manifest listed 16 unaccompanied minors traveling in economy class, but only 1 in first. Marcus Reynolds. The system had flagged his booking with a VIP discretion tag due to his father's status, meaning staff had been instructed to provide excellent service without drawing attention to his identity. Elena had missed or ignored this designation when making her decision. As the clock ticked toward the scheduled departure time, these institutional factors converged to create the perfect conditions for what was unfolding: a corporate culture that prioritized certain passengers over others, staff trained to avoid conflict rather than ensure fairness, executives who viewed discrimination complaints as PR problems rather than ethical failures, and now a 15-year-old black prodigy sitting in economy while his rightful seat remained unoccupied, claimed as territory by 2 men who embodied the entitlement the airline had implicitly encouraged. The system was working exactly as designed until Xavier Reynolds arrived to disrupt it. Supporting character's development. Elena Rodriguez had not always been the person who would dismiss a teenager's valid claim in favor of appeasing louder passengers. Growing up in a working-class Miami neighborhood, she had dreamed of travel and adventure, seeing a flight attendant career as her ticket to experiencing the world. 6 years into that career, the idealism had faded. She'd learned that advancement came from avoiding problems, not solving them. Her supervisor had made it clear during her second-year review, our premium passengers expect a certain environment. Your job is to maintain that environment, not challenge it. When facing the conflict between Marcus and the bodybuilders, she'd made the calculation countless service workers make daily. The path of least resistance seems safer than the path of justice. It wasn't that she believed Marcus was lying. She simply didn't want to confront 2 physically intimidating men over what seemed, in the moment, like a minor seating issue. Now, as she returned to the first-class cabin after escorting Marcus to economy, a flutter of doubt troubled her. The teen had been so certain, so composed despite the humiliation. Had she made the wrong call? He had a valid boarding pass. Didn't he? She asked herself silently, a creeping discomfort settling in her stomach. She glanced at her tablet, finally pulling up the passenger manifest properly. There it was, Reynolds. Marcus. Seat 2A. First class. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't just made a procedural error. She'd actively participated in discriminating against a passenger with a valid ticket. Her face flushed hot with shame as she considered what to do next. Admitting the mistake now would mean confronting the bodybuilders, potentially creating the very conflict she'd sought to avoid. But ignoring it meant becoming complicit in something far worse than a seating dispute. Across the cabin, Captain Michael Lawson completed his pre-flight checks in the cockpit. At 53, The veteran pilot had witnessed transatlantic's gradual transformation from a service-oriented airline to a profit-maximizing corporation. He'd filed 3 internal complaints about discriminatory practices he'd observed, only to see them disappear into administrative black holes. His authority as captain was substantial but limited. He could delay departure, remove disruptive passengers, or overrule cabin crew decisions, but only with clear justification that would satisfy corporate review. A seating dispute wouldn't typically meet that threshold. When his first officer mentioned a potential issue in first class, Lawson had sighed, "Let the cabin crew handle it unless it becomes a safety concern." Years of experience had taught him to choose his battles carefully. The first officer frowned. Apparently, it involves a VIP's son. That detail changed the calculus significantly. Lawson pulled up the passenger manifest on his screen, scanning for flagged bookings. Reynolds, Marcus, VIP discretion. The designation indicated someone connected to a high-value client or influential figure. "Keep an eye on this situation," Lawson instructed. "If it escalates, let me know immediately." Meanwhile, Dr. Patricia Whitman observed the aftermath of Marcus's removal with growing concern. The retired federal judge had spent 40 years on the bench, including landmark civil rights cases that had shaped national policy. At 72, she remained sharp-eyed and keenly attuned to injustice. Her intervention had been brushed aside by both the bodybuilders and Elena, but Dr. Whitman wasn't finished. She'd begun discreetly recording after Marcus was escorted away, capturing Vince and Diego's triumphant comments and Elena's uncomfortable expression as she returned. Dr. Whitman's own history influenced her reaction. In 1968, as a young law student, she had been removed from a first-class train compartment despite having a valid ticket. That experience had shaped her career direction, leading to her specialization in civil rights law. Seeing history repeat itself more than 50 years later filled her with both sadness and determination. "Young lady," Dr. Whitman called to Elena, "I'd like to speak with you about what just transpired." Elena approached reluctantly. "Yes, ma'am. That young man had a valid first-class ticket, didn't he?" Elena shifted her weight uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I checked the manifest. I've been watching carefully." Dr. Whitman interrupted, her tone measured but firm. "You never actually verified his information. You simply took these gentlemen's word over his." The observation landed like a stone dropping into still water. Elena's professional smile faltered. "I need to complete the pre-departure service," she said, attempting to retreat. "I understand," Dr. Whitman replied. "I just want you to be prepared to explain your decision to airline management, and perhaps to legal counsel." The subtle warning hung in the air as Elena moved away, her certainty and her decision increasingly fragile. Elsewhere in first class, other passengers processed what they'd witnessed through their own lenses. A tech executive who had initially ignored the confrontation now felt a nagging sense of complicity in his silence. A woman who had assumed Marcus didn't belong now questioned that assumption, wondering what evidence she'd actually based it on. A young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing they should have spoken up. "Should we say something?" the woman whispered to her partner. "It's too late now," he replied. "He's already been moved." "But it wasn't right," she persisted. "We both saw his boarding pass. It looked legitimate." These silent witnesses would soon become participants in the unfolding drama, their testimonies and recordings forming crucial evidence in what would become a defining case study in airline discrimination. For now, they watched and waited as the scheduled departure time approached, unaware that Xavier Reynolds was already moving through the terminal toward Gate 34. The digital display above first class updated 7:55, cabin doors closing in 5 minutes. Part 3, the confrontation builds. The bodybuilder's behavior worsens. "Yo, check it," Diego said, angling his phone to capture Vince lounging in first class. Another mission accomplished for the exclusive club. Vince flexed for the camera, his massive bicep filling the frame. "Gotta protect our environment. Know what I'm saying? First class should stay first class." The livestream audience responded with enthusiastic approval, comments scrolling rapidly across Diego's screen. "Elite status only. No free rides. You guys are savage, LOL." The view count had climbed past 20,000, with followers joining rapidly as the algorithm promoted the contentious content. Diego held up Marcus's crumpled boarding pass, which he'd retrieved from the floor after Elena escorted the teen away. "Look at this fake shit," he said, though the document was clearly authentic. Kid thought he could just walk in and sit with the grown-ups. Probably printed it at home, Vince added, though the airline's holographic security features were clearly visible even on the wrinkled paper. Or maybe he stole it. The insinuation hung in the air, heavy with implications that his audience readily absorbed and amplified in the comments. Diego smirked as he read them aloud. Someone's watching too many movies. Security threat for real. Good thing you guys were there. Elena approached with the pre-departure champagne service. Her smile strained as she overheard the commentary. Gentlemen, would you like... Hold up, Diego interrupted, turning the camera to include her. Elena, tell the Iron Army what happened with that kid trying to sneak into first class. Put on the spot and now on camera to thousands of viewers. Elena hesitated. Professional training competed with moral discomfort. There was a seating misunderstanding that's been resolved, she said carefully. Misunderstanding? Vince laughed. Kid was straight up trying to scam his way into a seat he didn't pay for. Good thing we caught him, right? Elena's expression flickered with uncertainty, but the camera was still rolling. We appreciate passengers following proper boarding procedures, she managed, the corporate non-answer buying time without committing to either truth or falsehood. See, Diego told his audience after Elena moved on. Even the staff knows what's up. That kid didn't belong here. The champagne fizzed in his glass, bubbles rushing to the surface like the thoughts now racing through Elena's mind. She'd made a mistake, a significant one, and now found herself unwillingly cast as a supporting character in their narrative. Diego switched platforms, creating a new post on Instagram with a photo of himself and Vince holding up their champagne flutes. The caption read, # first class exclusive club keeping it elite at 40,000 feet. Some people need to know their place. Sorry, not sorry. The post gained traction immediately, their combined followers amplifying the message. Within minutes, the # first class exclusive club had dozens of posts from supporters, then hundreds. As the algorithm favored the controversial content, the heavy bass line of hip-hop leaked from Vince's expensive headphones as he scrolled through his own social feeds, liking and sharing their content across platforms. The music created a cocoon of self-affirmation, drowning out the disapproving glances from other passengers. Emboldened by the virtual approval, Vince stretched his arm across seat 2A, Marcus's assigned seat, claiming it physically as he had done socially. Iron Army secured the perimeter, he announced to Diego's camera. No infiltrators in our zone. The language grew increasingly territorial, with military terminology that Diego, who had never served, appropriated from Vince. Securing the border of first class, Diego said. Maintaining standards, that's what real leaders do. Bond their followers ate it up, each comment and reinforcing the behavior, creating a feedback loop of escalation. What had begun as casual bullying was morphing into something more performative, more deliberate, as they recognized the engagement value of the confrontation. A notification appeared on Diego's phone, a booking agency that arranged appearances for fitness influencers. He showed it to Vince with a grin. They want us for a meet and greet at the London Expo. Said our numbers are up today. See market rewards value, Vince replied, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Success recognizes success. Whitman, still recording discreetly, captured this exchange. Her expression remained neutral, but her finger never left the record button on her phone. Evidence was accumulating with every boastful word. The Bodybuilders' narrative had completely divorced from reality. In their telling, now evolving in real time across social platforms, they had protected first class from an interloper, enforced rightful boundaries, maintained exclusivity standards that benefited all legitimate passengers. We're thinking about starting a travel channel, Diego told a follower who asked about their future content plans, showing real ballers how to travel right. First class only, no exceptions, no apologies. Vince nodded enthusiastically. Iron Army takes over the skies. Their followers multiplied, drawn by the controversy and performative dominance. Neither man noticed Dr. Whitman's steady documentation, nor did they register the discomfort of other first-class passengers. They certainly didn't notice the messages being sent from multiple phones to airline customer service, flagging the situation that was unfolding in real time at 40,000 feet. And they remained completely unaware that Xavier Reynolds had just entered the airport terminal, moving with purpose toward Gate 34, where Flight 882 was preparing for imminent departure. Marcus's strategic response. Marcus settled into seat 27F, a middle seat in economy class, surrounded by curious passengers who had witnessed his removal from first class. He maintained his composure, though his eyes betrayed the hurt beneath his calm exterior. "Hey," whispered the woman beside him, a college student named Sophia. "I saw what happened up there. That was messed up." Marcus nodded slightly, appreciating the acknowledgement but not wanting to discuss it further. He had more important considerations than seeking sympathy. His father's teachings echoed in his mind. When facing injustice, your first response should be strategic, not emotional. Xavier had drilled this lesson through both discussion and example, showing Marcus how reactive anger, however justified, often diminished one's ability to achieve meaningful resolution. The recycled air of the economy cabin felt stifling after the spacious environment of first class. Knees pressed against the seat in front of him, elbows tucked in to avoid invading his neighbor's space, the physical confinement paralleled his situation, trapped by others' assumptions, constrained by their perceptions. With methodical calm that belied his age, Marcus began implementing the response protocol his father had taught him for situations like this. First, documentation. He opened the Notes app on his phone and recorded the exact sequence of events, including direct quotes from the Bodybuilders and Elena. He noted timestamps, descriptions, and potential witnesses. 7:32 p.m. Approached first class with valid boarding pass for seat 2A. 7:33 p.m. Stopped by male passenger bodybuilder. Number 1 who took boarding pass 7:34 p.m. Second bodybuilder joined confrontation. Began recording 7:35 p.m. Flight attendant, Elena arrived. Didn't verify ticket properly. 7:36 p.m. Older woman attempted to intervene potential witness. 7:38 p.m. Escorted to economy despite showing valid boarding pass. Second step, preserve evidence. He took screenshots of his electronic ticket on the Airline app, his seat assignment confirmation email, and the receipt showing payment for first-class fare. He created a secure cloud backup of these documents immediately. Anger still churned inside him, a turbulent undercurrent beneath his calm surface. The disciplined part of his mind acknowledged the emotion without surrendering to it. This wasn't the first time he'd faced discrimination, and it wouldn't be the last. The difference now was that he knew how to channel the anger into strategic action rather than futile reaction. Third step, identify proper authorities. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, drawing curious glances from nearby passengers. "Excuse me," he said politely, making his way toward the rear of the aircraft where another flight attendant, James Parker, was preparing the galley for beverage service. "May I help you?" James asked, not looking up from his inventory count. "I need to speak with customer service regarding my seat assignment," Marcus said, his voice steady. James glanced up, taking in Marcus's youth and making the same rapid assumptions Elena had made. "Seating changes aren't possible once boarding is complete. You'll need to stay in your assigned seat for takeoff." "I wasn't assigned this seat," Marcus explained. "My boarding pass is for first class, seat 2A, but I was removed without verification." James's expression shifted from disinterest to mild annoyance. "Listen, kid, I'm sure Elena handled everything correctly. We can't just have passengers deciding where they want to sit." "I'm not deciding anything," Marcus replied, maintaining his composure. "I'm asking you to verify my booking." James sighed. "We're preparing for departure. Return to your seat, and customer service can address any concerns after we land in London." "May I speak with the captain, then?" "The captain is preparing for takeoff and can't be disturbed for seating issues." Marcus recognized the pattern. Another staff member choosing the easiest path rather than the correct one. He nodded once, having confirmed what he expected. The system was designed to protect itself, not to ensure justice. "I understand. Thank you for your time." As he returned to his economy seat, Marcus implemented the fourth step of the protocol: contact external support. He sent another detailed message to his father, updating him on his conversation with James and the continued refusal to verify his ticket. The crushing weight of institutional indifference settled on his shoulders. It wasn't just two bodybuilders. It was an entire system designed to value convenience over fairness, to prioritize the loud over the legitimate. The realization stung more than the initial confrontation. A notification appeared on his phone screen. Diego Hernandez had just posted on Instagram, using the hashtag #FirstClassExclusiveClub, The post showed the bodybuilders in first class, champagne flutes raised in triumph. Marcus didn't need to read the caption to understand the message. With calm deliberation that few adults could manage under similar circumstances, he captured screenshots of the posts, documenting the bodybuilders' continuing behavior. These would join his growing evidence file. Fifth step: maintain composure and prepare for resolution. Marcus knew his father was en route. He knew documentation was accumulating. He knew that justice, though delayed, was approaching. Rather than fixating on the immediate humiliation, he focused on the eventual outcome. He opened his quantum physics presentation, reviewing his notes with the same concentration he would have applied in first class. The environment had changed, but his purpose had not. "Is that quantum entanglement theory?" Sophia asked, glancing at his screen with surprise. "Yes," Marcus replied. "I'm presenting at the International Youth Science Symposium in London." "That's advanced," she said. "I'm a physics undergrad at MIT, and that's beyond what we're studying." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "It's interesting material." "Those guys who took your seat," she said, lowering her voice. "They have no idea who they're messing with, do they?" "They will," Marcus replied simply, checking the time display on his laptop. 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes until scheduled departure. He knew what was coming. Unlike the bodybuilders, he had been taught to think several moves ahead. The gathering storm. Xavier Reynolds moved through Miami International Airport with purpose, his athletic frame navigating the crowded terminal with efficient precision. Security cameras captured his progress. Terminal D entrance at 7:39 p.m. TSA pre-check at 7:43 p.m. Concourse midpoint at 7:47 p.m. The footage would later become part of the evidence package, showing his measured pace, neither running in panic nor sauntering without urgency. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his face, emphasizing the determined set of his jaw. The terminal's cacophony of announcements, rolling luggage, and conversations washed over him unnoticed as he focused entirely on reaching his destination. Airport staff who recognized him maintained professional discretion, though several sent quick texts to colleagues. Xavier Reynolds just passed Gate 27, heading toward international departures. Looks focused. His phone vibrated with a message from Marcus, updating him on the second flight attendant's dismissal. Xavier's expression remained composed, though a muscle tightened in his jaw. He typed a brief response. 5 minutes out. Stay where you are. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the situation continued to deteriorate. Vince and Diego had grown even more comfortable with their appropriated authority, now actively policing the boundary between first class and economy. "Iron Army checkpoint," Diego announced to his live stream as a flight attendant from economy attempted to pass through first class to retrieve supplies. "State your business in the elite zone." The young woman, clearly uncomfortable, attempted to laugh off the comment. "Just getting some extra blankets." "Proceed," Vince said with mock seriousness. "But no bringing back economy passengers with you." Their followers ate up the performance, comments flooding in with approval and encouragement. The hashtag First Class Exclusive Club had gained significant traction, trending within their niche community and expanding beyond it as the algorithm promoted the contentious content. Dr. Whitman continued her quiet documentation, her phone capturing every inappropriate comment. When Vince loudly complained about standard slipping and letting anyone into first class these days, she recorded it. When Diego suggested they should check IDs at the curtain, she recorded that too. The sounds of her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen blended with the ambient noise of the cabin. To a casual observer, she appeared to be texting or checking emails, not creating an evidentiary record that would later become crucial in formal proceedings. Other passengers had begun to document as well. The tech executive in 4C had started filming after overhearing Diego's explicit comments about keeping certain people where they belong. A young couple had positioned their phones to capture the bodybuilders' continuing behavior while pretending to take selfies. At 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes before scheduled departure, Captain Lawson received a message from the gate agent, potential VIP situation developing. Xavier Reynolds arriving regarding seating issue with son, advise holding departure. Lawson frowned, accessing the passenger manifest. The name Reynolds appeared in both first class and economy. The original booking and the manual override Elena had entered when relocating Marcus. The VIP tag attached to the reservation finally registered, and Lawson's confusion turned to concern. "We may have a situation," he told his first officer. "Let's delay pushback until we sort it out." He pressed the intercom button for the cabin crew phone. "Elena, can you come to the cockpit for a moment?" Elena, who had just finished serving pre-departure beverages in first class, felt her stomach tighten. Something in the captain's tone suggested this wasn't a routine communication. As she made her way forward, Whitman caught her attention. "Young lady, I feel I should inform you that several of us are documenting the behavior of those men," she said, nodding toward Vince and Diego, "and the way this young man's situation was handled." Elena's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing genuine concern. "I followed standard procedure." "Perhaps," Whitman interrupted gently. "But was it the right procedure?" The question hung in the air as Elena continued to the cockpit, her certainty increasingly fragile. The gravity of her mistake was beginning to dawn on her, along with the potential professional consequences. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cockpit door. Outside the aircraft, Xavier had reached gate 34 at 7:49 p.m. The gate agent, already alerted to the situation, recognized him immediately. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "we've been informed of the situation with your son. The captain has approved your boarding to resolve the matter." Xavier nodded once. "Thank you." "Sir," the agent added hesitantly, "we sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. If you'd prefer, we can remove your son from the flight and rebook you both on tomorrow's departure." "That won't be necessary," Xavier replied. "My son has an important engagement in London. We'll be continuing on this flight once his seating is corrected." The implied message was clear: this would be resolved, not avoided. As Xavier approached the aircraft door, security cameras captured his composed expression and deliberate movement. There was no anger visible, no aggression in his posture, just focused determination that made airport staff instinctively step aside. Inside the aircraft, Elena had just received a briefing from Captain Lawson about the developing situation. Her face had drained of color as she realized the magnitude of her error. "The father is boarding now to address the situation," Lawson informed her. "I expect you to provide full cooperation in resolving this matter professionally." "Yes, Captain," she managed, her voice smaller than usual. As she exited the cockpit, the cabin intercom activated. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Lawson speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay in our departure. We expect to be underway shortly and will keep you updated. Flight attendants, please stand by for further instructions." A murmur ran through the cabin as passengers processed this announcement. In first class, Vince and Diego barely registered it, still engrossed in their performative dominance for their online audience. "Probably mechanical issues," Diego told his live stream. "Good thing we're comfortable up here while they sort it out." Vince laughed, sprawling across his seat and the empty seat 2A beside him, Marcus's rightful place. "More time for champagne. Hit that bell. Elena." Neither man noticed Dr. Whitman's knowing expression as she checked her watch, 7:52 p.m., 8 minutes past scheduled departure time, in economy. Marcus received a text from his father. "I'm boarding now. Stay where you are until I send for you." He took a deep breath, a small smile of anticipation forming at the corners of his mouth. Sophia noticed and looked quizzically at him. "Everything okay?" Marcus nodded. "It will be soon." The cabin door reopened, and Xavier Reynolds stepped onto the aircraft, his presence immediately changing the energy of the space around him. He paused momentarily, taking in the scene before proceeding with measured steps toward first class. The gathering storm was about to break. The final provocation at 7:53 p.m., as Xavier made his way toward first class, Marcus decided to make one final attempt to reclaim his rightful seat. The delay in departure created an opportunity, and despite his father's instruction to stay put, he felt compelled to try once more through proper channels. He approached James Parker again, who was still organizing the economy cabin galley. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "Since there's a delay, could we please verify my ticket now?" James sighed with visible irritation. "Look, I told you." "Please," Marcus insisted. "It will only take a moment to check the system." Reluctantly, James pulled out his tablet. "Name," Marcus Reynolds. James tapped the screen, then frowned. That's odd. You are showing a first-class booking, seat 2A, but there's an override note from Elena. Can I return to my assigned seat now? Marcus asked. James hesitated, caught between procedure and the evidence on his screen. Let me check with Elena first. Wait here. Marcus stood by the galley as James made his way toward first class. Neither was aware that Xavier had already boarded and was moving through the economy cabin. Having spotted Marcus near the rear of the aircraft, the soft hum of the aircraft's ventilation system seemed to intensify as passengers sensed the building tension. Conversations quieted, heads turned slightly to track the developing situation without appearing to stare directly. In first class, Diego's livestream had gained significant traction, now exceeding 100,000 viewers as the controversy attracted attention beyond his regular followers. Comments flowed in a steady stream, most supporting the bodybuilders, but some questioning their behavior. We've created a movement, Diego told his audience. The hashtag First Class Exclusive Club is trending elite spaces for elite people. Am I right? Vince nodded emphatically. Some people need to learn where they belong. The comment carried clearly through the cabin, and several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Whitman's phone continued recording, capturing every incriminating statement. James reached the first-class curtain just as Vince noticed Marcus standing at the economy cabin threshold, visible through the gap in the divider. Whoa! Security breach, Vince announced loudly. The kid's trying to sneak back in. He rose from his seat, all 290 pounds of sculpted muscle moving with surprising speed to physically block the aisle. Diego swiveled in his seat, camera still rolling, capturing the confrontation from a perfect angle. Turn around, kid, Vince said, his voice carrying through both cabins. You've been told where you belong. Marcus stood his ground, though he had to tilt his head back to meet Vince's gaze. I was just speaking with James about my correct seat assignment. Your seat is back there, Tupon, Vince insisted, gesturing towards economy. Don't make this a problem. James looked confused, caught between the passenger manifest on his tablet and the physically imposing man blocking the aisle. Sir, if I could just check. It's been checked, Vince interrupted. The other flight attendant already handled it. Right, Elena. Elena, returning from the cockpit with new information about the situation, froze momentarily. Her eyes darted between Vince, Marcus, and her colleague James. The captain's warning about Xavier Reynolds boarding the aircraft had changed her calculation completely, but she wasn't sure how to de-escalate the situation Vince was creating. Actually, she began cautiously, we need to review. See, already handled, Vince said, cutting her off before she could correct her earlier error. He turned his attention back to Marcus. Last warning, back to economy. Diego zoomed in on Marcus's face with his camera. Getting tense now. Kid doesn't know when to quit. I'm just trying to sit in my assigned seat, Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite the intimidation. The scent of Vince's cologne, an aggressive, musky fragrance, intensified as he moved closer, using his physical size to tower over the 15-year-old. And I'm telling you that's not happening. The physical intimidation crossed a line that even Diego recognized as potentially problematic for their content. Hey, Vince, maybe ease up a little, he started, but Vince was fully committed to the performance now, aware of the audience watching. This is about respect, he said, loud enough for both the cabin and the live stream to hear clearly. Some people need to be taught respect. The racial undertone was unmistakable, and several passengers gasped. Whitman's expression hardened as she continued recording, while James looked increasingly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. I'm respectfully asking to take my assigned seat, Marcus replied, maintaining his composure despite the threatening posture looming over him. Vince placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, applying just enough pressure to be intimidating without leaving evidence of assault. Turn around and walk away. Now! The physical contact was the final line crossed. Diego caught it on camera, though he would later edit this footage from his posted version. Dr. Whitman captured it clearly, as did 3 other passengers filming discreetly. Marcus didn't flinch from the contact, but his eyes registered the violation. This was no longer just about a seat assignment. It was physical intimidation of a minor by an adult. Take your hand off my son, The voice came from behind Marcus, quiet but carrying a clarity and authority that cut through the cabin noise like a precision instrument. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Vince's hand froze in place on Marcus's shoulder. Xavier Reynolds stood in the aisle, his 6-foot frame considerably smaller than Vince's massive build, yet somehow filling the space with unmistakable presence. His expression remained composed, but his eyes locked onto Vince's hand with an intensity that made the bodybuilder instinctively step back. "Your son," Diego said, camera still rolling, confusion evident in his voice. "My son," Xavier confirmed, moving forward to stand beside Marcus, "who holds a valid first-class ticket for seat 2A. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. Passengers who had remained silent now watched with rapt attention. Elena's face had drained of color as she realized the full magnitude of her error. Captain Lawson had emerged from the cockpit, alerted by the cabin noise, and now stood observing from the forward galley. "Sir," Vince began, his tone markedly different, "there seems to be some confusion." "The only confusion," Xavier interrupted with calm precision, "is why my son is standing here instead of sitting in his assigned seat, which you appear to have taken." The timestamp on Dr. Whitman's recording showed 8:03 p.m. The flight was now officially delayed, and the confrontation that had been building for nearly 30 minutes had reached its inflection point. What happened next would determine not just the outcome of this incident, but the professional futures of everyone involved. Part 4, the revelation. Xavier Reynolds placed a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder, replacing Vince's intimidating grip with paternal reassurance. The contrast was striking. Where Vince had used contact as dominance, Xavier's touch conveyed security and support. "Are you all right?" he asked Marcus quietly. "I'm fine, Dad," Marcus replied. "Just a misunderstanding about my seat." Xavier nodded once, his gaze never leaving Vince as he addressed Elena. "I'd like to speak with you about this situation." Elena stepped forward, her professional demeanor severely strained. "Mr. Reynolds, we sincerely apologize for any confusion. If you'll both come with me, we can sort this out immediately." The change in her approach was stark, from dismissive to deferential in an instant. Several passengers exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the shift that occurs when someone with influence enters a situation. "There's nothing to sort out," Xavier replied evenly. "My son has a confirmed booking for seat 2A. I would like him seated there for departure." Vince, still blocking the aisle, had yet to move. The massive bodybuilder's confidence had visibly faltered, but he hadn't fully processed the changing dynamics. "Listen, man, we've been through this already." The kid was trying to... "My name is Xavier Reynolds," Xavier interrupted, his tone measured, "and you were about to step aside so my son can take his assigned seat." The name registered with several passengers immediately. The tech executive in 4C straightened in his seat, recognition dawning. A woman nearby whispered to her companion, "The Xavier Reynolds from Global Quantum, Diego," still filming but increasingly uncertain, caught the reactions on his live stream. Comments began flooding in with a different tone. "Wait, Reynolds the Reynolds? Dude, you're messing with a billionaire's kid. You guys are so screwed." For a brief, unguarded moment, Xavier's composed mask slipped. "Do I need to be Xavier Reynolds for my son to be treated with basic dignity?" he asked, the question cutting to the heart of the matter. Should it matter who his father is? The pointed question hung in the air, forcing everyone present to confront their own assumptions. Several passengers looked away, uncomfortable with the implicit indictment of their silent complicity. The shift in atmosphere was palpable, power dynamics reversing as recognition spread through the cabin. Vince, however, remained either oblivious or committed to his position. "Look, Mr. Reynolds or whatever," he said, folding his arms across his massive chest. "We've been in these seats since boarding began. Maybe there was a double booking or something, but there was no double booking," Captain Lawson interjected. Stepping forward from the galley, "Mr. Reynolds and his son have confirmed the reservations for seats 1A and 2A. Lawson's authoritative presence added another dimension to the confrontation. As the aircraft's commander, his word carried final authority on all matters within the cabin. "I'm Captain Michael Lawson," he continued, "and I'm formally requesting that you return to your assigned seat and allow Mr. Reynolds' son to occupy his..." Vince's resistance began to crumble under the combined pressure of authority. recognition, and the dawning realization that he had severely miscalculated. He glanced at Diego, whose previously enthusiastic filming had become hesitant, the camera angle shifting as if trying to distance himself from the situation. "We didn't know," Diego offered weakly, the first hint of damage control. "Nobody said anything about him being your son." "Would it have mattered?" Xavier asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. "Would you have treated him differently if you'd known who his father was?" The implication was clear. The question of whose son Marcus was should have been irrelevant to how he was treated. That it would have mattered exposed the shallow nature of their value system. Vince finally said, creating space in the aisle. "Whatever, man. It's not that serious. Take the seat." But Xavier remained still, his expression thoughtful. "Actually, I'd like to understand exactly what happened here before we proceed. Elena, could you please explain why my son was removed from his assigned seat?" Elena's composure faltered completely. "Mr. Reynolds, there was confusion about the seating arrangement, and I made a decision based on the information available to me at the time." "What information was that?" Xavier pressed. "Did you verify my son's boarding pass?" Elena faltered, unable to admit she had never actually checked the manifest properly. "She didn't," Dr. Whitman interjected from her seat. "I observed the entire incident. Your son presented his boarding pass multiple times, but it was never verified. These men," she gestured toward Vince and Diego, "asserted he didn't belong in first class, and that assertion was accepted without question." Xavier nodded his thanks to Dr. Whitman before turning back to Elena. "Is this accurate?" The flight attendant's silence was confirmation enough. "I see," Xavier said, his voice betraying no anger despite the situation. "Captain Lawson, I'd like to formally request incident documentation for what's occurred. I believe several airline policies have been violated." "Absolutely, Mr. Reynolds," Lawson replied. "We can begin that process immediately." Vince, increasingly uncomfortable as the situation shifted against him, attempted to reclaim control. "Look, this is getting blown way out of proportion. The kid can have the seat. No big deal." "On the contrary," Xavier replied, his gaze steady. "My son being physically intimidated and discriminated against is a very big deal." The word discriminated hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Several passengers nodded in agreement, the pattern now obvious to everyone in the cabin. Xavier turned to Marcus. "Son, please retrieve your belongings from economy. You'll be sitting in your assigned seat for this flight." As Marcus moved toward the economy cabin, Xavier addressed the bodybuilders once more. "Gentlemen, I believe you've been recording this interaction. I'd appreciate if you maintain those recordings in their entirety. They may be relevant to what follows." The warning was clear, but delivered without overt threat, just a calm statement of fact that sent Diego scrambling to save his live stream archive, suddenly aware that he had documented evidence of his own misconduct. With quiet authority that required no physical intimidation, Xavier had completely transformed the situation in less than 5 minutes. His presence had changed not just the outcome, but the entire power structure of the confrontation, and he was just getting started. The initial confrontation, Xavier approached Elena, who stood rigid with professional anxiety. Her previous confidence completely evaporated. He extended his hand, presenting both his identification and boarding pass. "I'd like to formally identify myself for the record," he said, his tone businesslike. "Xavier Reynolds, seat 1A. My son Marcus Reynolds is confirmed for seat 2A. Could you please verify this information on your manifest?" Elena took the documents with visibly trembling hands. "Yes, sir. I'll check right away." She consulted her tablet, the evidence of her error displayed in unmistakable digital clarity. "You and your son are indeed confirmed for those seats, Mr. Reynolds. I sincerely apologize for the confusion earlier." "I'd like to understand the nature of that confusion," Xavier replied. "My son presented his boarding pass, which contains all necessary verification. What prevented proper confirmation of his seating assignment?" The question was precise, focusing on process rather than accusation. Elena's professional training faltered as she searched for an answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. I should have verified more thoroughly," she admitted. "There was a misunderstanding about what my son looks like," Xavier suggested, his voice level but pointed. The implication hung in the air. Elena's discomfort was visible as she recognized the underlying issue that neither of them had explicitly named. For a moment, Xavier felt the familiar weight of parental doubt. Had he prepared Marcus adequately for these situations? Was the emphasis on strategic patience truly the right approach? Or was he simply teaching his son to absorb abuse for some nebulous future advantage? The questions flickered across his mind, visible for just an instant in a tightening around his eyes before his composed expression returned. Sir, I assure you that Transatlantic Airlines does not discriminate. I'd like documentation of this incident. Xavier interrupted, not interested in corporate platitudes. Captain Lawson mentioned this was possible. Yes, we can prepare an incident report, Elena confirmed, grateful for the procedural lifeline. I'll begin that process right away. Please include all relevant information, Xavier instructed. My son's original seat assignment, the override that placed him in economy, and the names of all staff involved in that decision. His methodical approach, focusing on documentation and accountability rather than confrontation, created a stark contrast with the bodybuilder's aggressive behavior. Several passengers watched with newfound respect, particularly those who had remained silent during Marcus's humiliation. What exactly are you doing, man? Vince interjected, his tone somewhere between defensive and concerned. Kid's getting his seat back. Why drag this out? Xavier turned to face him directly. I'm ensuring there's a record of what transpired. Would you prefer there wasn't? The question landed with precision. Vince shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the recording he and Diego had been so eager to create now served as evidence against them. Diego, still filming but with considerably less enthusiasm, attempted damage control. Look, we didn't know who the kid was. Again, why should that matter? Xavier challenged. Would you have behaved differently if you'd known he was my son? Is that the standard you apply, treating people based on who their parents might be? Diego fell silent, recognizing the trap in the question. Either answer would incriminate him further. Captain Lawson approached, having observed the exchange from nearby. Mr. Reynolds, we're preparing formal documentation of the incident. I've also notified our ground operations team about the situation. Thank you, Captain, Xavier replied. I'd also like to address the physical contact that occurred just before my arrival. My son was touched without consent by this gentleman. He nodded toward Vince. In what appeared to be an intimidation tactic, Vince's expression darkened. Whoa, I barely touched him. That's not what happened. Actually, Dr. Whitman interjected, holding up her phone. I have quite clear footage of exactly what happened, as I believe do several other passengers. The retired judge's intervention carried the weight of both evidence and authority. Captain Lawson's expression grew more serious. Sir, he addressed Vince, physical intimidation of another passenger is grounds for immediate removal from this flight. Removal? Oh, Vince sputtered. Are you kidding me? Over a tap on the shoulder, the footage will speak for itself, Xavier said calmly. I'm not requesting your removal at this time. I'm simply ensuring that all aspects of this incident are properly documented. Marcus returned from economy with his backpack, standing quietly beside his father. The contrast between his composed demeanor and the bodybuilder's increasingly agitated state was striking. Dad, he said quietly, my original seat appears to be occupied. He nodded towards seat 2A, where Diego's gym bag and personal items were sprawled across the space. Sir, Xavier addressed Diego, would you mind clearing my son's seat of your belongings? Diego hastily gathered his items, stuffing them into overhead compartments and under his own seat. The performance of dominance had evaporated, replaced by grudging compliance. As these exchanges unfolded, Elena had been consulting with other crew members, clearly discussing how to manage the escalating situation. She returned with a tablet displaying an electronic form. Mr. Reynolds, we've initiated a formal incident report, she explained, professional training reasserting itself. We'll need statements from all involved parties. Of course, Xavier agreed. I believe several passengers have footage that would be relevant to include as well. This statement caused both bodybuilders to exchange concerned glances. Their narrative control was slipping away as they realized the incident had been documented from multiple angles, not just their own carefully framed perspective. Is that really necessary, Mo? Diego asked, his earlier bravado completely absent. We've resolved the seating issue. Documentation is always necessary when airline policies are violated. Xavier replied simply, "Wouldn't you agree, Captain Ho?" "Absolutely." Lawson confirmed, "Transparency and accountability are core values at Transatlantic." The irony of this statement wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the earlier failure of those very values. Several passengers exchanged knowing looks, while Elena studied the cabin floor. Unable to meet anyone's gaze, Xavier had methodically established the framework for what would follow, not through threats or aggression, but through calm insistence on proper procedure and documentation. The power dynamics had shifted completely, and everyone in the cabin recognized it. The confrontation had evolved from physical intimidation to procedural accountability, a domain where Xavier operated with practiced expertise. The power shift as Marcus settled into his rightful seat, 2A. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had transformed completely. Passengers who had studiously avoided eye contact during his earlier humiliation now offered sympathetic smiles and nods of support. The power shift was palpable, not just in the seating arrangement, but in the social dynamics of the space. The leather seat felt cool against Marcus's arms as he settled in. The spacious pod, a stark contrast to the cramped economy seat he'd temporarily occupied. He ran his fingers along the polished wood veneer of the armrest, reclaiming the space that had been denied him. Diego, growing increasingly aware of the potential consequences, attempted to salvage the situation through his live stream. "Hey, Iron Army, slight change of plans. Turns out there was a booking mix-up, but we're all good now. Everything's cool with the Reynolds family." The comments scrolled rapidly across his screen, but the tone had changed dramatically. "Dude, you messed with Xavier Reynolds' kid. This is bad, really bad. Damage control time." Some followers were already distancing themselves, sensing the impending fallout. Vince leaned over to whisper urgently to Diego, "Who exactly is this guy? Why is everyone freaking out?" Diego's expression conveyed growing alarm. "Tech billionaire, like serious money and connections, global quantum technologies. Look at how the crew is treating him. This is bad." Recognition finally dawned on Vince's face as he processed the magnitude of their miscalculation. His physical dominance, the primary currency he traded in, had become suddenly irrelevant in the face of Xavier's different but far more substantial power. The soft chime of cabin announcements punctuated the tense atmosphere as Captain Lawson updated passengers on the departure delay. The ambient lighting had dimmed slightly for evening operations, creating pools of shadow and light that emphasized the division between different groups in the cabin. Across the aisle, Whitman continued her documentation, now openly filming the proceedings. Other passengers had joined her, their phones capturing the unfolding situation from multiple angles. The tech executive from Seat 4C had moved to introduce himself to Xavier, their brief conversation ending with an exchange of contact information. "I run a tech incubator," he explained. "I'd like to talk to you about your son's research when we reach London. What happened here was unacceptable." Captain Lawson returned to address the cabin, his authority now firmly reestablished. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're completing some administrative procedures and should be ready for departure shortly. Thank you for your patience." The diplomatic phrasing fooled no one. Every passenger understood that administrative procedures referred to the documentation of what they had witnessed. Elena approached Xavier with tablet in hand. "Mr. Reynolds, we prepared the initial incident report. Would you and your son be willing to provide statements for our records?" "Certainly," Xavier replied. "I believe formal documentation benefits everyone involved." His pointed glance toward the bodybuilders made the implication clear. Proper records would ensure accountability, regardless of how they might attempt to reframe the events later. Marcus provided his statement with remarkable clarity, recounting the sequence of events without embellishment or emotional coloring. His composed recitation of facts, including direct quotes from Vince and Diego, contrasted sharply with their earlier aggressive behavior. "They said first class wasn't for people like me," Marcus stated matter-of-factly. "They physically took my boarding pass and blocked my access to my assigned seat." As he spoke, several passengers nodded in confirmation, some adding details he had missed. The collective witnessing created a tapestry of evidence that would be difficult to dispute. "One more thing," Xavier said after Marcus finished. "I'd like to formally request the preservation of all relevant records, passenger manifests, seat assignments, override logs, and security footage from both the gate area and the aircraft. Elena glanced nervously at Captain Lawson, who nodded his approval. That's within your rights, Reynolds. We'll ensure all records are preserved. Diego, overhearing this exchange, had finally stopped filming. The once confident influencer now sat hunched in his seat, frantically texting his manager about potential damage control strategies. Vince, meanwhile, had fallen uncharacteristically silent, his earlier domineering presence diminished by the shifting context. Physical intimidation counted for nothing in a situation governed by documentation, procedure, and institutional accountability. Xavier turned his attention to his son. "Are you comfortable continuing on this flight?" he asked quietly. "We have options if you'd prefer alternative arrangements." "I'm fine, Dad," Marcus assured him. "My presentation in London is important. One incident doesn't change that." Xavier nodded with evident pride. "That's my son, focused on what matters." The exchange was overheard by nearby passengers, further cementing the contrast between Marcus's maturity and the bodybuilder's behavior. A notification sound drew attention to Diego's phone. FlexForce Apparel, one of his major sponsors, had sent a message requesting an immediate call. The live stream footage had already reached them, and their marketing team was in crisis mode. "This is ridiculous," Vince muttered, frustration replacing his earlier confidence. "All this over a seating misunderstanding." "Was it merely a misunderstanding, Doctor?" Whitman asked pointedly from across the aisle. "Or was it an assumption about who belongs in which spaces and who has the right to enforce those boundaries?" The retired judge's question laid bare the underlying issue that had fueled the entire incident. Several passengers nodded in agreement, while Elena studied the cabin floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Xavier checked his watch at 8:12 p.m. The flight was now delayed by over 12 minutes, and airline protocols would require documentation of the cause. This administrative requirement would ensure the incident remained in official records, regardless of how anyone might try to minimize it later. "Captain," Xavier addressed Lawson, "I understand we're delaying departure. I want to assure you that's not my intention. Once the incident documentation is complete, we're prepared for takeoff." "Appreciated, Mr. Reynolds," Lawson replied. "We're just finishing the necessary paperwork. Shouldn't be more than a few more minutes." As if on cue, Elena returned with additional documentation. "Mr. Reynolds, there's one more matter you should be aware of. As a member of Transatlantic's Board of Investors, you're entitled to file this under our executive complaint protocol, which triggers automatic review by senior management." This revelation sent another ripple through the cabin. Xavier's connection to the airline itself added yet another dimension to the power shift taking place. "I believe the standard protocol will be sufficient," Xavier replied. "For now." The implied "for now" hung in the air like a suspended sentence, its potential consequences understood by everyone present. Diego's phone buzzed again, another sponsor requesting immediate contact. The digital consequences were already cascading, accelerated by social media's instant transmission of the unfolding drama. The power shift was complete. What had begun as physical intimidation in a confined space had transformed into a multi-layered accountability process with professional, financial, and potentially legal ramifications. And all of this had happened without Xavier raising his voice or making a single explicit threat. The full revelation at 8:15 p.m., as the documentation process neared completion, Xavier addressed the bodybuilders directly for the first time since the initial confrontation. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone businesslike rather than confrontational, "I believe we should clarify a few points for everyone's benefit." Vince and Diego exchanged wary glances, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. "My name is Xavier Reynolds," he continued, "CEO of Global Quantum Technologies and, as you've just learned, a member of Transatlantic's investment board. My son Marcus is presenting groundbreaking research on quantum encryption at the International Youth Science Symposium in London tomorrow." The introduction wasn't delivered as a threat or boast, simply as relevant information that established context for what had occurred. "I'm mentioning this not because it should matter to how my son is treated," Xavier clarified, "but because your assumptions led to actions that have consequences beyond what you may have anticipated." Diego shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Reynolds, like I said, we didn't know." That's precisely my point, Xavier interrupted calmly. You didn't know, yet you acted with absolute certainty based on what you thought you knew. The observation landed with precision. Several passengers nodded in agreement, recognizing the broader principle at work. Your live stream has already been viewed by over 200,000 people, Xavier continued, nodding toward Diego's phone, including representatives from your sponsors, some of whom are now attempting to contact you. Diego's eyes widened. How did you... The notification banners are visible from here, Xavier explained simply. And my team has been monitoring the social media response since Marcus first texted me about the situation. This revelation, that Xavier had resources working in the background, even as he calmly addressed the situation in person, underscored the vast disparity in influence between the parties involved. The cabin lighting reflected off Xavier's watch as he checked the time, the subtle reminder of the passing minutes emphasizing the inexorable progression of consequences already set in motion. Let me be clear about what happens next, Xavier said, his voice remaining measured. This flight will depart for London. My son will participate in his symposium as planned. The documentation of this incident will proceed through proper channels. He paused, allowing the information to register. What you do next is entirely your choice. You can acknowledge what occurred, learn from it, and make appropriate amends. Or you can attempt to reframe the narrative, delete evidence, and minimize your responsibility. The choice was presented without judgment. Though the implication was clear, only one path would mitigate the growing consequences. I'm not looking to destroy your careers, Xavier continued. But accountability is non-negotiable. Vince, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Look, man, things got out of hand. We didn't mean any disrespect. Intention doesn't negate impact, Xavier replied simply. My son experienced disrespect, regardless of what you meant. The observation silenced Vince more effectively than any threat could have. Captain Lawson approached, tablet in hand. Mr. Reynolds, we've completed the incident documentation. All parties have provided statements except for, he glanced toward the bodybuilders. These gentlemen. We'll give our statements, Diego said quickly, recognizing the importance of controlling what entered the official record. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Dr. Whitman raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding documented from multiple angles by several witnesses. Her dry observation drew subtle smiles from nearby passengers. As Diego and Vince provided their statements, notably sanitized versions of events that omitted their most aggressive behaviors, passenger videos were already spreading beyond the aircraft. Despite the airplane mode restrictions, several recordings had been sent before boarding was complete, and those files were now propagating across social platforms. The hashtag first class exclusive club had been co-opted, transformed from the bodybuilder's triumphant marker into a symbol of criticism. Each minute brought thousands of new views and comments, most condemning the behavior captured on video. Mr. Reynolds, Elena said, approaching with professional caution. The incident report is complete. Captain Lawson has authorized departure as soon as all passengers are secured. Thank you, Xavier replied. We're ready whenever the captain is. Diego's phone continued to buzz with notifications despite being set to silent mode. The vibrations seemed to physicalize the digital consequences already cascading through his professional network. Sponsors, bookings, partnerships, all now in jeopardy from a single miscalculation. One moment, Xavier said as Elena turned to leave. There's a matter of procedure I'd like to address. When a passenger is displaced from their assigned seat, what is the standard protocol? Elena hesitated. The passenger should be verified against the manifest and seated according to their booking. And if a mistake is made, it should be corrected immediately once identified. She admitted. So at multiple points, established procedures were bypassed, Xavier observed. That suggests a systemic issue rather than an isolated incident. The observation shifted focus from individual behavior to institutional responsibility. Exactly where Xavier intended the accountability to ultimately rest. Captain Lawson, recognizing the implications, stepped in. Mr. Reynolds, I can assure you that I'll personally ensure this incident receives appropriate review at the corporate level. I appreciate that, Captain, Xavier replied. Accountability should apply at all levels. As the cabin crew prepared for departure, The dynamics between all parties had been fundamentally transformed. The bodybuilders sat in subdued silence, their phones continuously vibrating with incoming messages. Elena moved through her duties with heightened professionalism, addressing Marcus with the same courtesy she extended to other first-class passengers. Other passengers regarded Xavier and Marcus with respect, several making points of introducing themselves before settling in for takeoff. The aircraft's engines finally powered up at 8:23 p.m., 23 minutes behind schedule. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Xavier turned to Marcus. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine, Dad. Thanks for coming." "Always," Xavier replied simply. The simplicity of the exchange belied its significance. In a world that had attempted to define Marcus's worth based on appearance and assumptions, his father's unwavering support reaffirmed what truly mattered. Not external validation, but internal value. Not social perception, but personal integrity. The full revelation wasn't just about Xavier's identity or influence. It was about the power of composed response over reactive aggression, of strategic patience over impulsive action, of documentation over denial. As Flight 882 finally accelerated down the runway, lifting into the Miami night sky, the consequences of what had transpired continued to unfold, both within the aircraft and in the digital sphere beyond. Part 5, the resolution. The aircraft had barely reached cruising altitude when the first tangible consequences materialized for Vince and Diego. The seatback Wi-Fi had been activated, allowing passengers to connect to the internet, and the digital fallout from the incident was now fully visible. Diego stared at his phone in disbelief as notification after notification appeared. His most significant sponsor, Arctic Nutrition, had posted a public statement on all their social platforms. Arctic Nutrition has terminated our relationship with Diego Iron Fury Hernandez, effective immediately. The behavior displayed in recent videos conflicts with our core values of respect, inclusion, and integrity. We apologize to anyone affected and are reviewing all our ambassador partnerships. Similar announcements from FlexForce Apparel and 3 other brands followed in rapid succession. Within 40 minutes of takeoff, Diego had lost sponsorships worth over $400,000 annually. The screen of his phone illuminated his face in the darkened cabin, highlighting the shock and panic in his expression. Each notification sound was like a physical blow, the staccato rhythm marking the dismantling of his carefully constructed career. Vince wasn't faring any better. The International Bodybuilding Federation had emailed to inform him that his participation in the upcoming London Classic was under review, pending investigation of reported conduct violations. His agent had sent 7 increasingly urgent messages, the latest simply reading, "Call me now, damage control essential." Both men hunched over their devices, the earlier swagger replaced by expressions of growing panic. Their carefully constructed personal brands, built on performative dominance and exclusivity, were collapsing in real time, each notification another brick falling from the facade. Captain Lawson's voice came over the intercom, addressing the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to personally apologize for our delayed departure and the unfortunate situation that occurred during boarding. Transatlantic Airlines is committed to providing a respectful environment for all passengers, and I assure you that today's incident is being addressed at the highest levels of our organization." The public acknowledgement, unusual for in-flight announcements, signaled that the airline recognized the severity of what had transpired. Several passengers nodded approvingly, while Elena studied the cabin floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Midway through the flight, Elena approached Xavier and Marcus with visible trepidation. "Mr. Reynolds, Marcus, I owe you both a personal apology," she said, her professional demeanor temporarily set aside. "My handling of the situation was inexcusable. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made, and I failed to follow proper verification procedures." Xavier regarded her thoughtfully. "May I ask what led you to accept their version of events without verification?" Elena hesitated, wrestling with her own discomfort before answering honestly. Initially, the path of least resistance. It seemed easier to move Marcus than to confront them. She gestured toward the bodybuilders. "But if I'm being completely honest, I think I also made assumptions based on how they looked versus how he looked." Her voice dropped with shame at the admission. "I see," Xavier replied. "That kind of honesty is the necessary first step toward actual change." "I want to do better," Elena said. I've requested to join the airline's diversity training team once we return. I want to share this experience with other staff members. I appreciate your honesty, Xavier replied. Learning from mistakes matters more than pretending they didn't happen. Marcus nodded in agreement. Thank you for the apology. Their measured response, neither dismissive nor vindictive, stood in stark contrast to the behavior that had precipitated the incident. Several nearby passengers observed the exchange, noting the dignity with which father and son handled what could have been an opportunity for reciprocal humiliation. Meanwhile, Diego had attempted damage control through a hastily composed social media statement, claiming that the viral videos didn't show the whole story and that mistakes were made on all sides. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly negative, with commenters pointing out specific documented behaviors that contradicted his attempted reframing. Vince had opted for a different approach, posting nothing but instead making a direct appeal to Xavier. He approached Seat 1A with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, his voice notably quieter than before. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Xavier gestured to the empty space beside his seat. "Of course." "Look," Vince said, visibly uncomfortable. "Things got out of hand back there. I want to apologize to you and especially to your son." He glanced toward Marcus. "Kid, I was way out of line. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." The apology, while not comprehensive, acknowledged the core issue. Xavier looked to Marcus, leaving space for his son to respond as he saw fit. "I accept your apology," Marcus said after a thoughtful pause. "But I wasn't the only one affected by what happened." The observation went beyond personal grievance to consider the broader impact, a perspective that impressed even Dr. Whitman, who had been discreetly observing the exchange. "You're right," Vince admitted. "It was a bad example for our followers, and I need to address that." Xavier nodded. "Accountability often comes with opportunities for growth. How you respond now matters more than the mistake itself." The guidance was offered without condescension, one adult speaking to another about the path forward. Vince returned to his seat visibly relieved, though the consequences of his actions continued to accumulate on his phone. By the time dinner service began, Captain Lawson had made a decision about the incident. He approached the first-class cabin, addressing the bodybuilders directly. "Gentlemen, I've reviewed the incident documentation and passenger statements," he began formally. "Based on the evidence, I could exercise my authority as captain to remove you from the aircraft at our arrival in London for violating passenger conduct policies." Vince and Diego exchanged alarmed glances. "However," Lawson continued, "Mr. Reynolds has declined to press formal charges at this time, and I respect his judgment in this matter." The relief on their faces was palpable, though short-lived. "That said," the captain added, "this incident will be fully reported to airline management and relevant authorities. Your future travel privileges with transatlantic are subject to review, and my report will recommend a formal investigation into discriminatory conduct. The official consequences, while less immediate than removal from the aircraft, carried longer-term implications for both men. Their expressions suggested they were beginning to grasp the extent of the situation they had created. Dr. Whitman, who had been quietly observing these developments, approached Marcus during a lull in the dinner service. "Young man," she said, introducing herself properly, "I'm Dr. Patricia Whitman, retired federal judge. I want you to know that I've documented this incident thoroughly and am willing to provide testimony if needed." "Thank you, Dr. Whitman," Marcus replied. "I appreciate your support earlier. Not everyone would have maintained such composure under those circumstances," she observed. "You showed remarkable dignity." Xavier smiled slightly, pride evident in his expression. He's had practice navigating challenging situations. "Unfortunately, I suspect he has," Dr. Whitman replied, her tone conveying understanding of the unspoken realities. "My career exposed me to many such misunderstandings, as they're often euphemistically called." The conversation continued, bridging generations of shared experiences despite vastly different circumstances. Their discussion drew interested participation from nearby passengers, creating an impromptu community of engagement that would have been unimaginable during the tension-filled boarding process. Meanwhile, Elena had received a message from airline headquarters. Transatlantic's social media team had detected significant online activity regarding the incident, with multiple videos spreading rapidly across platforms. The company's crisis management protocol had been activated, and a formal investigation was being initiated, not at Captain Lawson's recommendation but in response to the growing public relations situation. Justice was manifesting in multiple forms: professional consequences for the bodybuilders, procedural accountability for the airline, and personal growth opportunities for everyone involved. The resolution wasn't about punishment, but about appropriate response, consequences proportional to actions, accountability without vengeance. As the aircraft continued its journey across the Atlantic, the immediate justice served was both tangible in its effects and measured in its application, a balance that reflected Xavier's strategic approach rather than reactive impulse. Father and son, humming. 3 hours into the flight, as most passengers dozed in the dim cabin, Xavier and Marcus sat with their seats partially reclined, speaking quietly. The privacy of first-class pods created a bubble of intimacy in the shared space, allowing for conversation without broadcasting to the entire cabin. The soft hum of the aircraft engines created a soothing background noise, occasionally punctuated by the gentle clink of ice in a glass or the rustling of a passenger adjusting their blanket. Outside their window, stars glittered against the deep black of high-altitude night, a cosmic backdrop to their conversation. "You handled yourself well," Xavier observed, pride evident in his voice. "Better than many adults would have in similar circumstances." Marcus managed a small smile. "I just followed the protocol we've talked about. Document everything, maintain composure, seek proper authorities." "The strategy worked," Xavier acknowledged. "But I know it wasn't easy." For a moment, Marcus's carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing the 15-year-old beneath the mature exterior. "It was humiliating, Dad. All those people watching. Nobody speaking up except Dr. Whitman." Xavier nodded, allowing space for his son's genuine emotions rather than dismissing them with platitudes. "That's often the hardest part, not the direct confrontation, but the silence of bystanders." "Why didn't they say anything?" Marcus asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "They could see what was happening." "People are complicated," Xavier replied thoughtfully. "Some stay silent out of fear, some from indifference, some because they don't recognize injustice until it's named by someone else, like you did when you arrived," Marcus observed. "Like Dr. Whitman did before I got here," Xavier corrected gently. "Remember that there are always allies, even if they're not immediately visible." Marcus considered this, processing the observation against his experience. "It just feels like I'm always having to prove I belong in spaces where others are automatically accepted." The admission revealed the cumulative weight of experiences beyond this single incident, the constant tax of navigating spaces where assumptions operated against him. "That burden isn't fair," Xavier acknowledged, neither minimizing the reality nor suggesting easy solutions. "And it won't disappear overnight, no matter how successful you become or how many barriers you break." He gestured subtly toward his own circumstances. A billionaire CEO still subject to assumptions and prejudices despite his achievements. "So what's the point?" Marcus asked, the question reflecting genuine adolescent grappling with systemic unfairness rather than defeat. "If success doesn't shield you, what does?" Xavier looked out at the vast darkness beyond the window, gathering his thoughts before responding. "I don't have perfect answers," he admitted, revealing a vulnerability he rarely displayed. "Sometimes I wonder if I've prepared you adequately, if the emphasis on strategic patience is truly the right approach." He turned back to Marcus. "There are days I question whether it should have taught you to fight more aggressively against these situations rather than navigate them strategically." The confession surprised Marcus. "You doubt your approach. Every parent doubts their choices," Xavier said with a slight smile. "Anyone who claims complete certainty about parenting is either lying or delusional." The shared moment of vulnerability strengthened their connection, father and son acknowledging the imperfect nature of their journey together. "Nothing shields you completely," Xavier continued, addressing Marcus's original question. "But purpose carries you through. Your work in quantum encryption matters. Your presence in spaces where people like you have been historically excluded matters. Your example for those who will come after you matters." The perspective shifted focus from individual comfort to collective progress, from personal shield to generational bridge. I still wish I could have handled it differently, Marcus admitted. Been more assertive, maybe. Assertiveness isn't always the most effective approach, Xavier pointed out. Your composed response created space for documentation, for witnesses to recognize what was happening, for systems to work, however imperfectly. He glanced toward the bodybuilders, now sleeping fitfully in their seats, phones finally set aside after hours of damage control attempts. Their approach, dominance through intimidation, gave them temporary control of the situation. Your approach, strategic patience and documentation, has created lasting consequences, which proved more effective. The question was rhetorical, the answer evident in the unfolding aftermath. I've been teaching you these strategies since you were young, Xavier continued, not just to protect you, but to equip you for creating meaningful change. Reactive anger, however justified, rarely transforms systems. Strategic response often does. Marcus nodded, absorbing the lesson reinforced through direct experience. I understand that intellectually, emotionally is sometimes harder. That's completely normal, Xavier assured him. The emotional response, the anger, hurt, frustration, is natural and valid. Strategy doesn't replace those feelings. It channels them toward effective outcomes. The conversation paused as Elena passed through the cabin, checking on passengers during the overnight portion of the flight. She nodded respectfully toward Xavier and Marcus before continuing her rounds, her earlier confidence replaced by careful professionalism. What will happen to them, Ishimam? Marcus asked quietly, nodding toward the sleeping bodybuilders. That depends largely on their choices from this point forward, Xavier replied. The consequences have already begun. Lost sponsorships, professional repercussions, public criticism. What matters now is how they respond to those consequences. And the airline, Elena, systemic issues require systemic solutions, Xavier explained. Individual punishments rarely address root causes. The airline needs policy reforms, training improvements, accountability mechanisms, changes that prevent similar incidents rather than just addressing this specific one. This perspective, focusing on transformation rather than retribution, reflected Xavier's broader approach to both business and social change. His success had come not from winning individual battles, but from restructuring systems to create more equitable outcomes. Do you think anything will actually change? Marcus asked, the question holding the tension between youthful idealism and emerging pragmatism. Some things already have, Xavier observed. The videos are circulating widely. Conversations are happening. Awareness is expanding. Change isn't always dramatic legislation or policy overhauls. Sometimes it's shifted perspectives, heightened awareness, recalibrated behavior. He gestured subtly toward other passengers in the cabin, several of whom had approached them during the flight to express support or share similar experiences. Connections formed, allies recognized, witnesses mobilized. These are elements of change, too. Marcus considered this, finding hope in the incremental rather than demanding the absolute. Your presentation tomorrow, Xavier said, shifting the conversation toward Marcus's purpose for the journey, is going to change how people think about quantum encryption. That's your contribution, advancing knowledge that benefits everyone. The reminder served as both affirmation and redirection, acknowledging the incident's significance while preventing it from overshadowing Marcus's larger purpose and accomplishments. Thanks, Dad, Marcus said simply, for coming, for understanding, for teaching me how to navigate situations like this. Always, Xavier replied, the single word carrying the weight of unconditional support. As the aircraft continued its overnight journey across the Atlantic, father and son fell into comfortable silence, Marcus reviewing notes for his presentation on his tablet, Xavier responding to business emails that had accumulated during the disruption. The normalcy of the moment, intellectual engagement rather than continued dwelling on the confrontation, represented perhaps the most meaningful resolution, refusing to allow others' behavior to define their experience or derail their purpose. In that quiet determination, more than in any external consequence or justice, lay the true power of their response. Airline response. As Flight 882 entered European airspace, Captain Lawson received a secure message from transatlantic headquarters in Atlanta. The incident had escalated beyond routine passenger disputes. triggering the airline's crisis management protocol. Multiple videos were circulating on social media platforms, most with viewership exceeding 500,000. News outlets had begun picking up the story, framing it as another example of discrimination in the airline industry. The tablet screen cast a blue glow across the captain's face in the darkened cockpit as he reviewed the message with a deepening frown. Public outrage was building with each passing hour. Hashtags multiplying across platforms, hashtag first class justice, hashtag Reynolds protocol, hashtag flight discrimination. Lawson reviewed the message carefully before summoning Elena to the cockpit for a private briefing. The situation has escalated significantly, he informed her, his tone professional but grave. Corporate is initiating a formal investigation. They've requested complete documentation upon landing, including all staff statements and passenger testimonials. Elena's face paled. Will I be suspended? That depends on the investigation findings, Lawson replied honestly. For now, you're expected to complete this flight professionally and cooperate fully with the review process. The captain's measured response reflected his understanding of institutional dynamics. Elena had made serious errors, but those errors existed within a system that often incentivized exactly the behavior she had displayed. I made a terrible mistake, she admitted, professional demeanor momentarily set aside. I should have verified his boarding pass properly. Yes, you should have, Lawson agreed, neither softening the reality nor adding unnecessary condemnation. The question now is what you'll learn from this experience. I've been thinking about that, she replied, her voice steadying with resolve. This isn't just about checking a boarding pass. It's about questioning my own assumptions and the patterns I've fallen into without even realizing it. Lawson nodded, recognizing the beginning of genuine reflection rather than mere damage control. As Elena returned to the cabin, Lawson initiated the next phase of the airline's response. He personally visited Xavier and Marcus in first class, taking the unusual step of sitting briefly in the companion seat to speak with them directly. Mr. Reynolds, Marcus, he began, I want to personally apologize for what occurred during boarding. As captain, the safety and dignity of all passengers is ultimately my responsibility. I appreciate that, Captain, Xavier replied. Your response once you became aware of the situation has been appropriate and professional. Transatlantic's executive team has been briefed on the incident, Lawson continued. They've authorized me to offer several accommodations as an immediate response. He outlined the airline's initial offerings: complimentary premium ground transportation in London, hotel upgrades, priority rebooking for their return flight, and immediate elite status in the airline's loyalty program. Xavier listened politely but shook his head. While I appreciate the gesture, Captain, those accommodations address our personal inconvenience rather than the underlying issues. What would you suggest instead? Lawson asked, recognizing the opportunity to engage constructively with someone who had both influence and insight. I'd prefer Transatlantic direct those resources toward meaningful reforms, Xavier replied. Staff training on bias prevention, clearer procedures for seat verification, accountability mechanisms that don't place the entire burden on individual employees to make difficult decisions without proper support. The suggestion shifted focus from personal compensation to systemic improvement, from addressing the symptom to treating the cause. I'll convey that perspective to headquarters, Lawson promised. They've also requested permission to contact you directly after we land to discuss the situation further. That would be appropriate, Xavier agreed, though I'd prefer we all focus on getting Marcus to his symposium on schedule first. The prioritization of his son's commitments over the developing corporate situation reflected Xavier's consistent values: purpose over drama, achievement over conflict. As Lawson returned to the cockpit, Elena approached once more, this time with the airline's chief purser, Michael Harrington, who had been informed of the situation and asked to personally oversee the remainder of the flight service. Mr. Reynolds, Marcus, Harrington began formally, I'm Transatlantic's lead purser for international flights. I want to extend our deepest apologies for the experience you've had. I'll be personally supervising all service for the remainder of this flight to ensure you receive the highest standard of care. The statement, while professionally delivered, represented another manifestation of the problem rather than its solution. Special treatment based on Xavier's revealed identity rather than equal treatment based on basic dignity. The irony wasn't lost on either Reynolds. Mr. Harrington, Xavier replied evenly. I appreciate your attention, but I'm more concerned with the systemic issues this incident has highlighted than with receiving preferential service now. Harrington nodded, recognizing the larger point. Of course, sir. If you don't mind my asking, what specific changes would you recommend based on your experience? The question created an opening for substantive dialogue rather than performative apology. Xavier outlined several specific reforms, verification protocols that apply equally to all passengers, regardless of appearance, training programs addressing unconscious bias in customer service decisions, clear escalation procedures when seating disputes arise, accountability metrics that track patterns of discriminatory incidents, transparent reporting of resolution outcomes. The conversation evolved from perfunctory corporate response to meaningful exchange of ideas, with other crew members eventually joining to contribute their perspectives. What had begun as damage control transformed into an impromptu focus group on operational improvements, with Xavier facilitating rather than dictating the discussion. As the aircraft began its descent toward London, Captain Lawson made an unprecedented announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the incident that occurred during boarding, Transatlantic Airlines is initiating a formal review of our policies regarding seat verification and passenger treatment. We invite any passengers with observations or suggestions to speak with our cabin crew before disembarking. Your insights are valuable in helping us improve. The public acknowledgement, admitting shortcomings and inviting feedback, represented a significant departure from the standard corporate approach of minimizing problems until forced to address them. Several passengers nodded approvingly, while others began writing notes to share their observations. Upon landing at Heathrow, Transatlantic's London station manager was waiting at the jet bridge, an unusual step that signaled the seriousness with which the airline was treating the situation. She introduced herself to Xavier and Marcus as they deplaned. Mr. Reynolds, Marcus, I'm Amanda Parker, Transatlantic's London Operations Director. Our CEO has asked me to personally ensure your smooth transition through the airport and to extend an invitation to discuss this incident at your convenience. Thank you, Ms. Parker, Xavier replied. My priority at the moment is getting Marcus to his hotel so he can prepare for tomorrow's symposium. Perhaps we could schedule a discussion for tomorrow afternoon. Of course, she agreed. We'll work around your schedule. As they proceeded through the terminal, Xavier received a notification Transatlantic Airlines had issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, apologizing for the failure to uphold our standards of respectful treatment for all passengers, and committing to a thorough review of policies and training. The response, while corporate in tone but represented unusually swift public acknowledgement, a direct result of the videos circulating online and the involvement of a high-profile figure like Xavier Reynolds. As they collected their luggage, Xavier showed the statement to Marcus. What do you think, he asked, genuinely interested in his son's perspective. Marcus read it carefully before responding. It's a start, but the real test will be whether anything actually changes for passengers who don't have billionaire fathers to advocate for them. The observation cut to the heart of the matter, identifying both the progress represented by the statement and its fundamental limitation. Xavier nodded in agreement, which is why what happens next matters more than what's happened so far. The airline's response, from initial denial to escalating recognition to formal acknowledgement, mirrored patterns familiar in institutional settings. The true measure would be whether momentum continued beyond the immediate crisis or dissipated once public attention shifted elsewhere. As they exited the customs area, Xavier received another notification the airline's CEO had requested a personal meeting during their London stay. The institutional machinery was now fully engaged, driven by a combination of public relations necessity and genuine concern for systemic improvement. The message was clear. What had begun as a seating dispute had evolved into a catalyst for potential institutional change, exactly the outcome Xavier's strategic approach had been designed to achieve. The Bodybuilders' downfall begins as passengers disembarked at Heathrow. Vince and Diego huddled in the jet bridge, faces illuminated by their phone screens as they assessed the damage to their carefully constructed brands. The night flight had brought no respite from the digital consequences, cascading through their professional networks. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the terminal accentuated their haggard expressions. The lack of sleep and mounting stress etched clearly on their faces. Despite their physical size, they seemed somehow diminished, shoulders hunched as they scrolled through the mounting evidence of their professional collapse. This is a complete disaster, Diego muttered. scrolling through an email from his agent. 6 canceled appearances. 3 terminated contracts. My supplement line is reconsidering our relationship, effective immediately. Vince's situation wasn't any better. The London Classic, the bodybuilding competition that had been the primary purpose of their trip, had officially withdrawn his invitation to compete. The email cited behavioral standards violations and conduct unbecoming a professional athlete. We need to get ahead of this, Vince insisted, the decisive tone masking growing panic. Release a statement, shoot an apology video, something. They found a quiet corner of the airport terminal and set up Diego's phone on a luggage handle, preparing to record their response. After 3 false starts, they produced what they believed was an appropriately contrite message. Iron Army, we need to address what happened on our flight, Diego began, his usual confident delivery replaced by careful scripting. We made a serious mistake in how we treated a young man who was rightfully traveling in first class. Vince nodded solemnly beside him. Our behavior didn't reflect the values we try to promote. We let our assumptions cloud our judgment, and we acted in a way that was disrespectful and harmful. Diego picked up the rehearsed narrative. We especially want to apologize to Marcus Reynolds and his father Xavier for our behavior. What happened was wrong, and we take full responsibility. The apology, while hitting the expected notes, lacked genuine reflection about the nature of their actions. Neither man addressed the underlying assumptions that had led to their behavior, focusing instead on the consequences they now faced rather than the harm they had caused. They uploaded the video immediately, hoping to stem the tide of criticism flooding their social platforms. The response was swift and unforgiving. Too little, too late. And notice how they only apologize after finding out he was a billionaire's son. Would you be apologizing if the videos hadn't gone viral? This is damage control, not genuine remorse. Their carefully crafted message had fallen flat, perceived as protection of financial interests rather than genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The comments section became a case study in failed crisis management, with engagement analytics showing 87% negative sentiment across platforms. As they collected their luggage, Diego received a call from Arctic Nutrition's marketing director, his largest remaining sponsor, and the company most prominently featured in his social content. I need to take this, he told Vince, stepping away for what he hoped would be a constructive conversation about damage control strategies. 5 minutes later, he returned ashen-faced. They're out, completely terminated. The legal team is drafting formal paperwork to dissolve our contract under the moral conduct clause. Vince winced. Can they do that? Apparently, the videos constitute clear evidence of breach. Diego replied, Beatrice, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. And they're demanding I remove all content featuring their products within 48 hours. Arctic Nutrition's decision represented more than lost income. It was a public disavowal from the fitness industry's largest supplement company, a signal to other brands that association with Iron Fury now carried significant reputational risk. Their shared hotel room, booked when they were riding high on sponsorship funds and competition invitations, now seemed an extravagance they could ill afford. Both men sat on opposite beds, scrolling through their phones in stunned silence as the digital consequences continued to multiply. The room's elegant furnishings, premium linens, marble bathroom, panoramic London view, now seemed to mock their downfall. The contrast between their physical surroundings and their collapsing professional status created a dissonance that neither man had the vocabulary to process. Diego's live stream account, previously boasting over 120,000 followers, was hemorrhaging subscribers by the thousand. The comment sections on his recent posts had been overrun with criticism, necessitating restricted commenting to prevent further damage. Vince's phone buzzed with a prejudice from his personal trainer clients, 3 high-profile executives who had valued his coaching services at $300 per hour. All 3 had sent variations of the same message: services no longer required. My gym partnership deal is being reevaluated, Vince announced, reading an email from his hometown fitness center where he'd been the featured trainer and partial owner. The board is concerned about alignment with brand values. The bodybuilding competition that had been the purpose of their London trip had not only withdrawn Vince's invitation, but had issued a public statement. The London Classic upholds the highest standards of sportsmanship, respect, and integrity. Following review of recent events, we have withdrawn invitations to competitors whose behavior conflicts with these values. We remain committed to creating an inclusive environment that celebrates athletic excellence regardless of background. While the statement didn't name Vince specifically, the timing made the connection unmistakable. The competition he had trained 6 months for, around which he had structured his entire nutritional and physical preparation, was now closed to him. Diego attempted another angle on their apology, posting a more detailed statement that emphasized their backgrounds and personal struggles. The post included phrases like, "We've worked hard to get where we are," and "everyone makes mistakes," without substantively addressing the discriminatory nature of their actions. This attempt backfired even more dramatically than their video, with social media users describing it as playing the victim and making it about themselves instead of their behavior. The hashtag boycott bodybuilders began trending in fitness communities, with influential accounts calling for brands to sever ties with influencers who displayed similar behavior. By noon London time, less than 12 hours after the incident occurred, Diego and Vince's professional status had been fundamentally transformed. What had taken years to build, sponsorships, partnerships, follower counts, competition invitations, had unraveled in a matter of hours. Their carefully curated image of success replaced by public recognition of their authentic character. "Maybe we should reach out to them directly," Vince suggested desperately. "The kid and his dad apologize in person." "And say what?" Diego replied, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. "Sorry we humiliated your son, but please call off the internet. They didn't do this to us. We did it to ourselves." The recognition, while belated, represented the first genuine moment of accountability from either man. Acknowledgement that the consequences they faced stemmed directly from choices that they had made rather than external forces acting upon them. "What do we do now?" Vince asked, the bravado completely gone from his voice. Diego stared at his phone, where notifications of unfollows and canceled partnerships continued to accumulate. "I don't know, man. I really don't know." The question hung in the air unanswered, a fitting conclusion to their downfall. The men who had built careers on projecting certainty and dominance now found themselves without direction or defense, facing consequences proportionate to actions they had undertaken with casual confidence just hours earlier. The timestamp on Diego's phone read 10:30 m.m. London time. The hashtag boycott bodybuilders had now exceeded 50,000 posts. The digital clock was ticking on what remained of their carefully constructed personal brands. Part 6, the aftermath and systemic change, immediate aftermath. As Marcus prepared for his presentation at the International Youth Science Symposium, the incident from Flight 882 continued to generate ripples far beyond the individuals directly involved. Media outlets had picked up the story, framing it within broader narratives about discrimination in travel and social media accountability. The symposium venue, a grand Victorian-era building at Imperial College London, buzzed with whispered conversations about the viral incident. Several attendees approached Marcus before his presentation, expressing both support and curiosity about what had occurred. Xavier had issued a single, measured statement to press inquiries. What occurred on transatlantic flight 882 highlights issues that many travelers face daily. My son handled himself with composure and dignity throughout. While this incident has received attention due to our family's public profile, the underlying concerns deserve consideration regardless of who experiences them. We hope this leads to meaningful improvements in how all passengers are treated. The statement redirected focus from personal grievance to systemic concerns, consistent with Xavier's strategic approach to creating change rather than simply winning individual confrontations. Marcus's symposium presentation proceeded as scheduled, his groundbreaking work on quantum encryption algorithms receiving enthusiastic response from the scientific community. The packed auditorium fell silent as he demonstrated a novel approach to quantum key distribution that improves security while reducing computational requirements. The implication for data security is significant, Marcus explained, his voice steady and confident as he addressed the gathering of world-class researchers. By leveraging quantum entanglement in this specific configuration, we create encryption that remains secure even against quantum computer attacks. Several attendees commented on his extraordinary poise given the media attention surrounding the flight incident. "I'm here to discuss quantum encryption, not airport dramas," he responded when a journalist attempted to divert the post-presentation questions toward the viral videos. "My research is what matters today." The redirection, Focusing on his intellectual contributions rather than his experience as a discrimination victim demonstrated the same strategic awareness his father had modeled. Marcus refused to be defined by what had happened to him, insisting instead on being recognized for what he had created. As the applause faded and attendees filed out, a representative from Cambridge University approached Marcus with a tentative recruitment offer, 2 years early. "We'd be interested in discussing your doctoral research options," she said. "Your work on quantum encryption is genuinely revolutionary." Meanwhile, Transatlantic Airlines CEO Richard Hargrove had convened an emergency leadership meeting to address the escalating situation. The airline's social media mentions had increased 2,800% overnight, with sentiment analysis showing overwhelmingly negative perception. Customer service liners were flooded with inquiries about discrimination policies, many from high-value frequent flyers threatening to take their business elsewhere. The boardroom's tension was palpable as executives reviewed the videos, which had now been viewed over 5 million times across platforms. The footage showed not just the confrontation, but the systematic failure of airline procedures at multiple points. Hargrove issued a formal apology that went beyond standard corporate language. The treatment experienced by Marcus Reynolds on Flight 882 represents a failure on multiple levels. While we have always claimed to value dignity and respect for all passengers, this incident reveals gaps between our stated ideals and actual practices. Rather than merely apologizing, we are initiating immediate policy reviews and training enhancements to address the underlying issues. We have reached out to the Reynolds family to listen and learn from their experience as we work to ensure such incidents never recur. The acknowledgement of systemic issues rather than isolated employee error represented an unusually candid corporate response, driven partly by the high-profile nature of the incident, but also by recognition that public sentiment had shifted regarding accountability for discriminatory practices. Elena Rodriguez had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, though Captain Lawson had advocated for remedial training rather than termination, noting that operational policies had often incentivized exactly the behavior she had displayed. "Firing one employee won't fix a broken system," he argued in his formal incident report. Rodriguez made significant errors in judgment, but those errors occurred within institutional practices that prioritize conflict avoidance over equal treatment. Both the individual and the system require correction. Dr. Patricia Whitman had provided her video documentation to both the airline and several civil rights organizations, along with a detailed statement regarding her observations. As a retired federal judge with expertise in discrimination cases, her testimony carried particular weight in both corporate and public spheres. "What I witnessed wasn't merely poor customer service," she noted in her statement. "It reflected embedded assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces and who has the authority to enforce those boundaries. These patterns extend far beyond a single flight or airline." The broader context she provided helped frame the incident as representative rather than exceptional, turning a single confrontation into a case study for examining widespread practices. As Xavier and Marcus returned to their hotel after the symposium, they found the lobby filled with journalists seeking comments. Xavier politely declined extended interviews, reiterating that his son's academic achievement deserved focus rather than the airport incident. Marcus just delivered groundbreaking research on quantum encryption that could revolutionize data security, he told the assembled reporters. That's the story worth covering today. The redirection wasn't just protective, it was strategic, refusing to allow discrimination narratives to overshadow Black excellence and achievement. Several technology journalists, recognizing the significance of this point, shifted their coverage to focus on Marcus's research contributions alongside mentions of the flight incident. In their hotel suite, father and son reviewed the developments of the past 24 hours with analytical distance rather than emotional reactivity. "The response has exceeded what I anticipated," Xavier observed, scrolling through media coverage on his tablet. "This seems to have struck a chord beyond the specific circumstances." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Because it's not really about us. It's about patterns people recognize from their own experiences." The observation reflected wisdom beyond his years, understanding that their individual incident had resonated because it represented collective concerns rather than isolated grievance. As they prepared for dinner, Xavier received a call from Transatlantic's CEO requesting a meeting the following morning. "They're moving quickly," he noted after ending the call. "Public pressure creates urgency that internal advocacy rarely achieves." Will anything actually change? Marcus asked, the question reflecting both hope and skepticism. Some things already have, Xavier replied, gesturing toward his phone where notifications of policy announcements and corporate statements continued to accumulate. Whether those changes prove meaningful or merely performative remains to be seen. The immediate aftermath had established the incident as more than a viral moment. It had become a catalyst for examination of practices and assumptions extending far beyond one flight or airline. What remained uncertain was whether this momentum would translate into lasting transformation or dissipate once public attention inevitably shifted elsewhere. 3-month impact. 3 months after Flight 182, the incident had evolved from viral moment to case study and institutional response to discrimination. Transatlantic Airlines had implemented what they termed the Reynolds Protocol for passenger verification, a standardized procedure requiring consistent documentation checks regardless of appearance, age, or perceived status. The protocol included specific language addressing unconscious bias, clear escalation procedures for disputed seating, and accountability metrics for tracking compliance. Flight attendants now receive mandatory quarterly training in fair treatment practices, with scenarios directly drawn from the incident involving Marcus. The airline's training center in Atlanta had been transformed, where once role-play scenarios had focused primarily on handling intoxicated passengers or medical emergencies. New modules specifically addressed discrimination prevention. Video screens displayed before and after metrics showing dramatic improvements in passenger satisfaction among minority travelers. The Reynolds Protocol has fundamentally changed our operational culture, noted Transatlantic's newly appointed Chief Inclusion Officer, Dr. Amara Johnson. By naming and addressing the specific failures that occurred, we've created procedures that minimize discretionary judgment in situations where bias often manifests. Early implementation data showed promising results. Complaints regarding discriminatory treatment had decreased 41% in the first quarter after implementation, while proper seat verification compliance had reached 98% across the fleet. The Federal Aviation Administration had opened a formal investigation into systematic discrimination in air travel, using Flight 882 as a primary case study, but examining patterns across multiple carriers. Initial findings revealed troubling consistency in how passengers of color, particularly younger travelers, experienced heightened scrutiny and differential treatment when accessing premium services. What happened to Marcus Reynolds was not an isolated incident. The preliminary report stated, "Our investigation has identified similar occurrences across multiple airlines, suggesting industry-wide practices that require regulatory attention." The investigation had expanded beyond transatlantic to examine protocols at all major domestic and international carriers, with recommendations for standardized verification procedures and anti-discrimination training requirements scheduled for release within 6 months. Industry publications had transformed the incident into a cautionary tale, with Aviation Weekly publishing a detailed analysis titled, "The Billion-Dollar Mistake: How Unconscious Bias Threatens Airline Profitability." The article outlined the financial implications of discrimination beyond immediate public relations damage, including customer attrition, regulatory penalties, and litigation risk. Elena Rodriguez had completed an intensive rehabilitation program focusing on bias recognition and intervention strategies. Rather than returning to cabin service, she had requested assignment to Transatlantic's training department, where she now helped develop scenarios for flight attendant education based on her firsthand experience. "I made a serious error in judgment that day," she acknowledged in an internal airline publication. "My responsibility now is to ensure other crew members learn from my mistake rather than repeating it." Her willingness to transform personal failure into educational opportunity had earned cautious respect from colleagues and recognition from management as an example of constructive accountability. The bodybuilders' professional trajectories had diverged significantly in the months following the incident. Diego Hernandez had embraced a genuine redemption journey, partnering with anti-bullying organizations to develop programs for schools and gyms. His social media presence, though significantly diminished, had shifted focus from self-promotion to honest reflection about toxic masculinity and performative dominance. What happened on that flight forced me to confront behaviors I'd normalized throughout my career, he explained in a podcast interview that garnered unexpected positive response. The persona I created wasn't just harmful to others, it was destroying my authentic self. Diego had begun working with youth organizations in underserved communities, using his background in physical fitness to create programs emphasizing both bodily health and emotional intelligence. His redemption narrative, while still evolving, demonstrated genuine effort to transform negative experience into constructive change. Vince Matthews, by contrast, had doubled down on resentment, creating new social media accounts focused on cancel culture narratives that framed him as a victim of political correctness rather than the consequence of his own actions. His following had dwindled to a small but vocal minority, his professional opportunities limited to fringe organizations willing to overlook his documented behavior. The contrast between their responses is itself instructive, Xavier observed during a board meeting of his educational foundation, which had begun developing curriculum materials about digital accountability using the incident as a case study. Same experience, different lessons drawn, dramatically different outcomes. The observation captured a fundamental truth about accountability, that consequences alone didn't determine growth. What mattered was how individuals processed and responded to those consequences, whether they chose reflection or deflection when confronted with their own behavior. Marcus had returned to his academic pursuits with renewed focus, his quantum encryption research now advancing through peer review toward potential publication in prestigious scientific journals. The incident had neither defined nor deterred him, becoming simply one experience among many in his ongoing development. "I don't think about it much anymore," he told his father when asked during a weekend visit. "It happened. We addressed it. Systems are changing. My work matters more than dwelling on past encounters." The perspective reflected the balanced approach Xavier had modeled throughout, acknowledging harm without allowing it to become all-consuming, seeking accountability without pursuing vengeance, transforming negative experiences into constructive outcomes without minimizing their significance. 3 months after Flight 882, what had begun as a viral confrontation had evolved into something more substantial, a catalyst for examination and reform that extended beyond individual participants to address institutional patterns and practices that had long gone unchallenged. Long-term change. 6 months after the incident, Transatlantic Airlines released comprehensive data on the impact of their reforms. Discrimination complaints had decreased 63% across their entire operation. Customer satisfaction scores for minority passengers had increased 47%. Employee surveys showed 89% of the staff reporting greater confidence in handling seating verifications and resolving passenger disputes. The airline's annual report featured a full section dedicated to inclusion metrics, with transparent reporting on complaint patterns, resolution outcomes, and ongoing training effectiveness. What had begun as crisis response had evolved into competitive advantage. The Reynolds Protocol has become our operational standard, CEO Richard Hargrove announced during the company's quarterly earnings call. What began as crisis response has evolved into competitive advantage. Our research indicates that passengers across demographics increasingly choose transatlantic, specifically because of our commitment to equal treatment. The business case for inclusion had become undeniable, as market data revealed passengers actively selecting carriers based on their discrimination policies and practices. What had initially been framed as a public relations problem had transformed into a strategic opportunity. With Transatlantic's stock price rising 11% since implementation of their reform procedures, Xavier had established the Travel Equality Foundation in partnership with Dr. Patricia Whitman, channeling his experience into systematic advocacy rather than personal vindication. The foundation provided legal support for travelers experiencing discrimination, collected data on industry-wide patterns, and developed educational resources for both passengers and transportation providers. The foundation's headquarters in downtown Miami served as both operational center and symbolic statement, deliberately located near Transatlantic's regional hub as a constant reminder of the ongoing work required to transform transportation systems. What happened to Marcus revealed systematic issues that affect thousands of travelers daily, Xavier explained during the foundation's launch event. Our goal is to transform individual incidents into collective improvement, creating transportation systems where dignity doesn't depend on status or appearance. The foundation had already secured commitments from 3 major airlines and 2 hotel chains to implement verification protocols similar to Transatlantic's Reynolds Protocol, with accountability metrics and regular compliance reporting. Marcus had established a student organization at his university called Equitable Access Initiative, focusing on addressing discrimination in educational settings. The group conducted research on disparities in academic opportunities, developed peer support networks for students experiencing marginalization, and created accountability frameworks for educational institutions. Academia faces many of the same challenges we witnessed in that first-class cabin, Marcus observed during a panel discussion that received national attention. Assumptions about who belongs in which spaces, differential standards of verification, selective application of rules. These patterns limit human potential across sectors. His ability to translate personal experience into structural analysis had earned respect from both student activists and institutional leaders, creating dialogue across traditionally adversarial boundaries. Several universities had invited the organization to conduct policy reviews and training programs, extending the impact beyond Marcus's immediate academic community. Elena Rodriguez had completed her rehabilitation training and become a leading advocate for accountability-based reform within Transatlantic. Rather than being terminated, she had been reassigned to help develop and implement the very protocols her actions had necessitated. When I failed to verify Marcus's boarding pass properly, I wasn't just making an individual mistake, she explained during an industry conference on inclusive service practices. I was enacting patterns I'd absorbed throughout my career and training. Transforming those patterns requires both personal and institutional change. Her presentation, titled From Compliance to Commitment, Creating Cultures of Equal Treatment, had been adopted as training material by transportation providers across sectors, from airlines to cruise lines to railway operators. The Department of Transportation had incorporated lessons from Flight 882 into new industry-wide standards regarding passenger verification and dispute resolution. The regulations, scheduled for implementation across all U.S. carriers within 18 months, established consistent protocols designed to minimize discretionary judgments where bias often manifested. The incident involving Marcus Reynolds highlighted vulnerabilities in existing practices. The regulatory announcement stated, these new standards address those vulnerabilities through procedural consistency, transparent documentation, and meaningful accountability mechanisms. An industry analyst had initially predicted resistance from carriers concerned about implementation costs, but market data revealing passenger preference for airlines with strong anti-discrimination policies had transformed compliance from regulatory burden to competitive necessity. Transatlantic's investment group, on which Xavier held board membership, had implemented accountability metrics across transportation investments in their portfolio, requiring regular reporting on discrimination complaints, verification compliance, and staff training completion. These requirements had created ripple effects throughout the industry as investment capital increasingly flowed toward companies demonstrating commitment to equitable practices. Financial incentives accelerate change more effectively than moral arguments alone. Xavier noted during an economic forum address, when equal treatment becomes profitable, resistance to implementation diminishes dramatically. The observation captured a fundamental truth about institutional transformation, that aligning ethical imperatives with financial incentives often achieved what either approach alone could not accomplish. 6 months after Flight 882, the incident had evolved from viral moment to case study to catalyst for substantial reform across multiple sectors. What had begun as a confrontation between individuals had transformed into examination of systemic patterns, resulting in procedural changes, policy reforms, and cultural shifts that affected travelers far beyond those directly involved in the original encounter. The long-term impact demonstrated the difference between momentary outrage and sustained transformation, between reactive response and strategic reform that addressed root causes rather than merely managing symptoms. 1 year after Flight 882, Marcus and Xavier Reynolds returned to Miami International Airport, preparing to board the same transatlantic road to London for the International Youth Science Symposium, where Marcus would present his latest research developments. The airport experience bore little resemblance to their previous journey. Transatlantic's check-in procedures now included consistent verification protocols applied to all passengers regardless of appearance or status. Gate agents received tablet alerts flagging any override attempts for additional review. Customer service representatives now wore body cameras during dispute resolution interactions, creating accountability through documentation. The terminal buzzed with the familiar sounds of travel, announcements echoing through the high ceilings, conversations in multiple languages, the rhythmic beep of luggage scanners. But subtle differences marked the transformed environment. verification procedures conducted with consistent professionalism, staff interactions characterized by respectful attentiveness regardless of passenger appearance. "Welcome, Mr. Reynolds and Dr. Reynolds." The gate agent greeted them, using Marcus's newly acquired academic title following early completion of his undergraduate degree and acceptance to a prestigious doctoral program. "Your boarding passes have been verified. We'll begin boarding in approximately 20 minutes. The professional courtesy, extended without knowledge of Xavier's board position or their connection to the Reynolds protocol now implemented throughout the airline, demonstrated how thoroughly operational culture had transformed in the months since their previous journey. Captain Michael Lawson, who had been promoted to Director of Flight Operations following his handling of the original incident, greeted them personally as they boarded. "Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds," he said, acknowledging both father and son with equal respect. "It's good to see you again under better circumstances. The improvements are evident." "Captain Lawson, Xavier observed, noting the systematic verification procedures being applied consistently to all passengers as regardless of appearance or perceived status. "Your experience catalyzed changes we should have implemented years ago." Lawson acknowledged. "Sometimes progress requires uncomfortable catalysts." The conversation reflected the constructive relationship that had developed between the Reynolds family and transatlantic leadership, neither adversarial nor obsequious, but focused on tangible improvements resulting from difficult circumstances. In the first-class cabin, a new generation of flight attendants trained under the Reynolds protocol demonstrated consistent verification procedures without differential treatment based on appearance or assumptions. The atmosphere reflected professionalism rather than preferential deference, dignity rather than discrimination masquerading as discretion. As they settled into their seats, Xavier received a message request from Diego Hernandez, who had continued his redemption journey with increasing authenticity in the months since the incident. "Mr. Reynolds," the message read, I understand you and Marcus are traveling to London again. If appropriate, I'd welcome the opportunity to meet briefly and express my continued apologies in person. I've been working with youth organizations on anti-bullying programs, trying to transform my mistake into educational opportunity. Regardless of your response, I wish you both a safe journey." The message reflected genuine growth rather than performative remorse, focusing on transformative action rather than merely seeking forgiveness. Xavier showed it to Marcus, leaving the decision entirely to him. "I'd be willing to meet with him," Marcus said after thoughtful consideration. "His actions since the incident suggest he's genuinely trying to change." The response reflected Marcus's own growth, neither naive forgiveness nor rigid condemnation, but measured assessment based on demonstrated behavior rather than promised intentions. A brief meeting was arranged during their London stay, with Diego explaining the youth programs he had developed and the personal transformation the incident had catalyzed. "I built my entire identity around physical dominance and exclusivity," he acknowledged during their conversation. "What happened on that flight forced me to confront the emptiness of that approach, not just its harm to others, but its limitations for my own development." Marcus listened thoughtfully before responding. "The programs you're creating for young people matter more than any apology. Actions demonstrate values more clearly than words." The exchange represented genuine resolution rather than mere reconciliation, acknowledgement that accountability had led to growth rather than simply closing a chapter without meaningful change. Vince Matthews, by contrast, had continued his downward spiral, his attempts to rebuild his brand on grievance narratives failing to gain traction beyond fringe supporters. His final public statement on the incident, a lengthy social media post blaming political correctness and cancel culture for his professional decline, had received minimal engagement, confirming his growing irrelevance in the very spaces where he had once commanded attention. The divergent paths of the two bodybuilders provided perhaps the clearest illustration of accountability's true purpose. Not punishment, but transformation. Not retribution, but growth through genuine reflection. "It's never been about ruining careers," Xavier observed during a private conversation with Marcus after their meeting with Diego. "It's always been about creating systems where actions have appropriate consequences, and those consequences create opportunity for genuine development rather than mere compliance." The perspective captured the philosophy that had guided their approach throughout, focusing on constructive outcomes rather than punitive responses, on systemic transformation rather than individual castigation. Transatlantic's implementation of the Reynolds Protocol had expanded beyond their own operations to influence industry-wide practices. The Department of Transportation had formalized many of its elements into regulatory requirements, creating consistent standards across carriers. Investment groups had incorporated compliance metrics into funding decisions, aligning financial incentives with ethical practices. What had begun as a confrontation in a confined space had catalyzed examination and reform, extending far beyond those directly involved. The transformation wasn't complete. Institutional change rarely achieves perfection, but meaningful progress had replaced performative gestures. Substantive reform had succeeded superficial response. As Flight 882 lifted off once more, carrying Marcus toward another opportunity to share his intellectual contributions with the scientific community. Father and son exchanged knowing glances that required no verbal elaboration. They had transformed a potential trauma into a catalyst for change, not through vengeful pursuit but through strategic response, not by demanding retribution but by demonstrating resolution. In that balanced approach, acknowledging harm without being defined by it, seeking accountability without pursuing destruction, transforming negative experience into constructive outcome, lay perhaps the most meaningful resolution of all: the ability to move forward without forgetting, to create change without being consumed by the catalyst that necessitated it. 1 year after Flight 882, this forward movement, progress without amnesia, advancement without denial, represented the true measure of resolution. "Thanks for coming to London today," Marcus said as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. "For my presentation, I mean, not just because of what happened last time." "I wouldn't miss it," Xavier replied simply. "Your work matters. That's always been the point." In that straightforward exchange lay the essence of their shared philosophy, focusing on creation rather than reaction, on contribution rather than grievance, on the work that remained rather than the barriers overcome. The most meaningful resolution wasn't found in punishment or apology, but in sustained transformation that created more equitable systems for all who would navigate them in the future. If this story moved you, has this story made you reflect on dignity, accountability, and positive change? Remember that every day, we all face choices about how we respond to injustice and treat those around us. Like Xavier and Marcus, you can choose strategic response over reactive anger. You can document injustice rather than simply endure it. You can seek systemic improvement rather than just personal vindication. Subscribe now to join our community of viewers committed to creating a world where everyone's dignity is respected. Your subscription supports more powerful stories that illuminate important social issues through compelling narratives. Share this video with someone who needs to see that assumptions have consequences, that accountability creates opportunity for growth, and that strategic patience often achieves more than immediate reaction. Comment below with your own experiences of witnessing or challenging discrimination. What approach did you take? What worked? What would you do differently now? Remember, true strength isn't measured by physical dominance or social position, but by the wisdom to transform challenging situations into opportunities for positive change, both for yourself and for those who will come after you. Hit that like button, ring the notification bell, and join us in creating a world where everyone can travel and live with dignity.